Chapter 537. You've done well. The throne under Su Li automatically turned around, and her charming face was revealed to the public for the first time. Her slender and white fingertips touched the corner of her eyebrows, and her smile was as pure and beautiful as an orchid in an empty valley. Mister, you are a wise leader. The sect leaders bowed in unison, unable to conceal the excitement in their eyes. Breaking away from the sage sect's control and unifying the entire region, if it was 10 years ago, they wouldn't even dare to think about it. Ni sect, which was composed of 25 sects in Jojo region, definitely had the potential to become a member of holy sects. The ranks of the sage sects, as long as one was a cultivator, who wouldn't rush to join? The so-called winner takes all. It was nothing more than this. Under the expulsion of such a mentality, the lords who joined the Ni sect voluntarily or not showed unprecedented enthusiasm at this moment. Of course, all of this was built on the premise that there was someone powerful enough to lead all of them. The aura seems to be the same. Fong Ling looked at Su Li sitting on the white throne absent-mindedly. She couldn't hide the disappointment in her eyes. No matter how similar her temperament was, it still wasn't her. The female cultivator in front of him was far too young. Su Yang pursed his lips. This old monster still liked to act young as usual. I'm Su Jojo. Su Li glanced at everyone present. Her tone was light, but it was full of unspeakable overbearingness and pressure. Now you are the Grand Elder of Ni sect, and in the future, you will be the Lord of Jojo region. Do you have any objections? As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere here froze. Yen Zai, who knelt on one knee at the front, had a firm look in his eyes and said loudly, Mister, you are so talented that you should be the ruler of Jojo region. Seeing this, Hua Yan's eyes flashed. She stepped forward and bowed her head slightly. She shouted, Greetings, Jojo region lord. LVU, Dongfang Wushu and others knelt down and shouted, Greetings, Jojo region lord. Greetings, Jojo region lord. Gue Baiyin and others who had been taught the soul tactics echoed. Seeing so many people respond, the people of the 23 sects finally let go of the last hesitation in their hearts. They all knelt down and bowed to worship. Greetings, Jojo region lord. Greetings, Jojo region lord. Greetings. For a time, the hall was filled with cheers. The people who were captured alive looked at each other in shock. Even Li Hai, who had no fear in his heart, couldn't help but be shocked. The scene of the change of dynasty in the Jojo region happened in front of him. Everything happened so fast that he felt unreal. However, the faint pain from his body told him that everything was real. Unfortunately, the Lord of Yushu sect fled with his people, and their old ancestor is nowhere to be found. In the crowd, Mu Hong couldn't help but say, and her face was full of unwillingness. When she mentioned the topic, the lords of the 12 sects attacking Yushu sect also remembered this omission and spoke one after another. The immortal Dao Tea tree disappeared as well. Old monster Jade Void must have made a deal with the immortal Dao Tea tree. With the immortal Dao Tea tree's escape technique, it should be able to do it without anyone noticing. Sir, if we don't get rid of these fish that slipped through the net, I'm afraid there will be flaws in our plan. Dong Minglan said worriedly. Ever since she had taken over the Liyang sect, she, as the vice sect leader, had risen rapidly in just 6 years. She had replaced the original sect leader and become the only person in charge of the Liyang sect. With the rise of her status, she not only did not underestimate Ni sect, but also increasingly felt that this seemingly young lord was unfathomable, so she had always been loyal and devoted to him. It's fine. Su Li smiled lightly and waved her hand. Hua Yan immediately turned around and smiled at the crowd. Don't be impatient, everyone. After an hour, you will see the result. As soon as this was said, everyone was stunned, and then their faces changed to different degrees. They were surprised and doubtful. Could it be that Mr. can even stop the immortal Dao tea tree? That is an old monster that has lived for nearly 10,000 years. Li Hai's calm face became gloomy, and he was faintly uneasy. Was his sacrifice going to be in vain? In the core space of the underground tea tree, the hundreds of people who escaped from Yushu's sect gathered everywhere in groups of 3 or 5. Qi Chen and Bei Xiao Liang protected Mo Qin on both sides, both silent. Mo Qin stared blankly at the front of the nothingness. Su Li's voice and smile in the past sometimes flashed in her mind, and sometimes turned into Li Hai's unsmiling face. There had never been a moment when she felt so disgusted. Obviously, she didn't have any ability, but she naively wanted to protect everything. In the end, she harmed everyone. It turns out that I am a scourge. Li, Brother Hai, it is me who harmed you, it is me. Mo Qin's eyes were full of self-reproach. She bowed her head and bit her lips tightly, clutching her heart tightly. Master, Bei Xiao Liang looked at his master's uncomfortable look, and he also felt uncomfortable in his heart. But he was also helpless. All he could do now was to practice hard. Qi Chen took a deep breath and grasped the spiritual stone in his hand. At this moment, he had the same idea as his senior fellow apprentice Bei Xiao Liang. Only by becoming strong enough could he protect Master, could he avenge Master Li Hai. Boom! Suddenly, the entire core space of the tea tree shook violently, and then stopped from running at high speed. What's the matter? Have we arrived at the outer region? Yao Shuangya stood up nervously. Ding Yan beside him was still calm, and he sent a message, Biz Hui, do you want to turn against us? Don't forget, only if you send us to the outer region, I will unlock the last seal left in your body. Ding Yan, don't underestimate my ability. A green light group was transmitted into the core space and turned into a clear picture. In the picture, the boundary tablet of Zhuozhou region was clearly visible. Looking at the surrounding desolate landform, it seemed that it was the Dafu region near Zhuozhou region, which was already very far from Yushu's sect. What a fast speed! Ding Yan was slightly shocked, but he was more happy to get rid of death. The Dafu region had been destroyed, and few people came here. It was the best place to hide and heal. Great! We escaped. The rest of the people of Yushu's sect also showed joy. Even Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen were inevitably affected, and their faces showed a trace of relief. But this kind of relief did not last for a breath. Suddenly, a crack appeared in the green core space. Then, an extremely terrifying repulsive force was generated out of thin air. Everyone was caught off guard, and they were all spat out of the space by Biz Hui. More than 100 people rolled on the ground. Ahem, Ding Yan stood up awkwardly, looked up and saw thousands of eyes around him, and even saw Li Hai's shocked face. His face suddenly changed. Here is not the extraterritorial area, but Yushu's sect. When the rest of the elders saw the scene in front of them, and then heard the roar of the old ancestor, how could they not understand their own situation, and they all showed despair. It's over. How could it be? Bei Xiao Liang gritted his teeth so hard that he almost bit blood. When he saw Li Hai, who was seriously injured and captured in the crowd, the despair and grief in his heart rose to the extreme. Senior fellow apprentice, look, the person sitting at the top. Suddenly, Qi Chen bumped into him and pointed to the throne at the top blankly. Bei Xiao Liang looked back, and suddenly fell into a sluggish state. Mo Qin did not notice the abnormality of her two apprentices. In her eyes, there was only Li Hai covered with blood. She stumbled over. Yan Zai received Su Li's signal and ordered people to make way for her. There was a slight respect in his eyes. Li Hai covered his mouth and coughed violently twice before he said, "You shouldn't come back." Mo Chin suddenly smiled and gently grabbed Li Hai's cold hands full of blood. No, I should come back. I figured it out. What happened is irreversible. Since I can't save you, it's better to die together. Suddenly touched by the strange warmth, Li Hai's body stiffened, and then his old face blushed. He said in a muffled voice, maybe, things are not as bad as you think. He was not a fool. How could he not notice the unusual movements of Yen Zai and others? The people of Ni's sect clearly had 100 ways to kill him before, but they just seriously injured him and didn't kill him. Before seeing Yen Zai voluntarily make way for the team, he thought that Ni's sect wanted to catch him alive and then kill him as an example to others. But now it seemed that he guessed very wrong. Bishui, how dare you lie to me? Ding Yan's eyes were bloodshot, and he stared at the old man's face in the turquoise vortex in the hall. Hearing Ding Yan's words, Bishui suddenly laughed in a low voice. Tut tut, the grand elder of your Yushu sect deceived me that year. How can I fall into the same trap for the second time? It is more pleasant to cooperate with the grand elder of Ni's sect. The seal in your hand has long been unlocked by the grand elder of Ni's sect. Don't waste your effort. Tut tut, how does it feel to fall from heaven to hell? You! The killing intent in Ding Yan's eyes skyrocketed. Before he made a move, he suddenly felt a very heavy pressure shrouding him, which pressed him to the ground with a bang and couldn't move. Bishui, you can go now. Su Li's tone was cold, and Bijui's eyes suddenly changed slightly. He disappeared in the hall with the vortex, and his pneuma quickly went away with the wind. Everyone in the hall saw that Bishui was so afraid of Su Li, and their awe of her deepened again. Perhaps their new master was not inferior to the old monster of holy sections. They just didn't know how such a terrifying figure appeared out of thin air in Jojo region. The name, Su Jojo, was too strange, and it was probably fake. The identity of the new master was too mysterious. Sensing that Bishui went around outside and returned to the underground of Yushu's sect to wait for death, Su Li's eyes returned to gentleness. The 10-year period was coming to an end, and Bishui would die suddenly in a few days. This was related to the big secret of her body of evil ghost and blood poison. Naturally, it couldn't be exposed. So, she simply made use of the waste and pretended that Bishui left again. Fortunately, everything went according to plan, and there was no accident. Thinking of this, Su Li looked back at Ding Yan. Looking at the old man who had committed countless sins on her, she smiled and said softly, Immortal Yushu, have you ever thought that you would have such a day? Ding Yan's eyes were full of anger, and he was about to speak. At this moment, the pressure that shrouded his seriously injured body suddenly increased, and his internal organs were deformed due to the pressure. The sharp pain surged, and Ding Yan suddenly blacked out. He spat blood and fainted. Old ancestor. Yao Shuangya knelt beside Ding Yan. His eyes were blank, and he was at a loss. He didn't even show any sign of resistance. He was just a puppet of Ding Yan, and he didn't have any ambition of rather die in glory than live in disgrace. In the crowd, the lord of Zihan's sect, who was captured alive, sighed deeply when he saw this scene. At this point, there was no difference between sects in Jojo region. Chapter 538. After dawn, the sun was covered by thick clouds, and it was drizzling. In Yushu Mountain, a new bamboo building was built under the disappearing Tea Peak. It was quiet and elegant in the mountains and rivers. Su Li stood under the eaves, looking quiet and focused. She reached out to take a drop of rain. Her fingertips were cold, as if they could penetrate her heart. Standing behind her, Yen Zai didn't understand why this ordinary rain was so beautiful. Master's mind was always hard to guess. After sighing secretly, Yen Zai coughed softly and said in a low voice, "Master, the 23 sects have brought their people back to their sections. According to what you said, we won't announce that we belong to any sect first." Su Li came to her senses and nodded gently. "There is no impenetrable wall in the world. Even if I control the spies of holy sects, it won't take long for the reputation of any sect to reach their ears. However, if there is room, I will have time to prepare." Yen Zai looked worried. "Master, although holy sects don't know your existence, they can't sit back and watch a new holy sect rise. I'm afraid that a hard battle will be inevitable at that time." Su Li smiled when she heard the words, which made Yen Zai's state of mind calm down a lot. "You come from Void Sword Sect, so you know that holy sects in all major regions can never be a piece of iron. Besides, there is the competition for the Tianjiao list, which distracts our attention. Our pressure is not as great as you think." Yen Zai nodded in agreement. "What you said is very true. This period of time is enough for us to stabilize the internal situation. Even if holy sects come to probe, they can't easily collapse." "Yes." Su Li responded. Yen sent a message that the selection of the Tianjiao in other major regions is in full swing. We have to hurry up and participate in those who should participate. Don't let others see the flaws. Speaking of this, her voice paused, and her tone was slightly soft. "How are my master and others?" Master Mo Qin was placed in the Wanxin Pavilion with the best healing effect in Yushu sect. She was just frightened, but not seriously injured. But the deputy lord of Lihai, Yen Zai, scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "At that time, I was nervous, and I didn't know the relationship between him and Master Mo Qin. I didn't expect that the deputy lord of Yushu sect was so weak." Su Li couldn't help laughing. Perhaps it was because Yen Zai had been by her side for too long that he had almost forgotten that he was once a genius of Glory sect. In the 6 years when she entered the Chuangxing path, Yen Zai had nothing to do. He practiced hard, and with the help of the secret medicine he made, his cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. When she came out, she was already at the peak of Huashan realm, half a step away from entering the nature's test period. How could Li Hai, who was only at the early stage of Huashan realm, be his opponent? Go and get busy. In these 10 years, you've crossed 2 realms, from Jindan to deification. Although your foundation is not damaged, your state of mind needs to be accumulated over time. You should settle down and comprehend it before you make a breakthrough. Zai has learned a lot. In the Wanxin Pavilion, Li Hai suddenly opened his eyes, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. Mo Qin, who was guarding by the side, saw him wake up and immediately asked, Vice Lord Li, how is your injury recovering? Does your chest still hurt?" Li Hai nodded and said in a muffled voice, "If you can call my name again, I can get better faster." Mo Qin blushed and looked slightly annoyed. She got up and walked out. Li Hai immediately followed her when he saw it. Bei Xiaoliang and Qi Chen in the outer hall suddenly smiled. After the disaster of Yushu sect, the relationship between the Master and Vice Lord Li seemed to be frozen. It was a good thing that there was a crack. "Senior fellow apprentice, have you heard about the people who escaped with us? What happened to them now?" Qi Chen's expression was slightly restrained, and he transmitted the sound in a low voice. Bei Xiaoliang shook his head. "I was healing Vice Lord Li all morning and didn't go out." "What did you hear? Do you remember the ice prison that imprisoned senior sister apprentice May before?" Qi Chen's voice was low, and Bei Xiaoliang's face changed slightly. "Lord, old ancestor, and holy girl are all locked up there. I heard that there are also the lord and elders of Zihan sect. Shaoqin, what is the origin of this Ni sect? Do you have a clue?" Li Hai didn't seem to catch up with Mo Qin. He returned to the house and sat next to Bei Xiaoliang. He frowned slightly. "They seem to treat us very well. Except for leaving the sect, they don't restrict our actions at all. They even let me live in the Wanqin Pavilion to heal. Bei Xiaoliang and Qi Qin looked at each other, and a thin figure appeared in their minds at the same time. The kindness she released to them in the shattered spirit's illusory realm was still clear. If they wanted to know the answer, it seemed that they could only ask him. Bei Xiaoliang was a little lost in thought, and suddenly heard a scream of Mo Qin outside the door. Li Hai's face changed, and he immediately rushed out of the door. Bei Xiaoliang and Qi Qin also followed him. In the courtyard of the Wanqin Pavilion, Mo Qin stared blankly at Su Li, who suddenly appeared in front of her. She looked down at the empty kettle in her hand, and then saw the water stains on the black gauze clothes of the beautiful woman in front of her, which was dripping down the edge of the clothes. Panic suddenly appeared in her eyes. She was careless for a moment, and even poured the water used to water the flowers on the person with the highest status in Zhejiu region. If this woman was angry, Li Hai and Bei Xiaoliang, Qin. Li Hai flashed out of the house and saw the scene in front of him. His heart suddenly sank, and the scene of the ancestor vomiting blood and fainting last night kept appearing in his mind. However, he still resisted the pressure and walked to Mo Qin's side, tightly grasped Mo Qin's cold hand, and bowed his head. "Senior, please forgive me." Mo Qin didn't mean it. At this time, Bei Xiaoliang and Qi Qin also followed up. Seeing this scene, they were surprisingly not nervous. Su Li glanced at the two, and then her eyes returned to the master, who was so flustered that she lost her sense of propriety. She was silent for a while, and her indifferent and somewhat inhuman face suddenly became gentle. She waved her hand to disperse the water stains on her body, and smiled. "Don't be nervous, come in and talk." Both Mo Qin and Li Hai were shocked, and then they couldn't help but feel flattered. Bei Xiaoliang and Qi Qin thought it was normal, but now that they knew Su Li's identity, they did not dare to take the initiative to speak. Thank you, master." Mo Qin reluctantly responded and followed into the house, but she was nervous. Although the face of the Lord of Zhejiu region in front of her was very gentle, which was completely different from the cold and ruthless person last night, she still couldn't stop her palms from sweating. "Sit down anywhere. Don't be too restrained. I'm here to solve your doubts today." Su Li waved her hand, and a special light flashed in the depths of her plain eyes. After all, the fact was not like in the Chuangxing path. In the cold despair of the previous life, the master lit a candle of hope for her. Although the candle was still extinguished in the end, it became the last warmth in her heart in this life, and did not let her completely fall into the cold. Unfortunately, it's not the time for a showdown. Su Li's eyes dimmed. Bizhui saw the situation of the master. She wanted to let the master get out of guilt, but the details of the fate ancestor were related to deduction. The more she exposed, the more likely it was to repeat the same mistake. A little impatience will spoil the great plan. Su Li, at this time, you have to be calmer. Even if the Zhejiu region you conquered is really pulled out, no one will want to be an enemy of a character with the combat power comparable to a junior emperor. But if you show any of the identities of the Daughter of Luck and the Body of Evil Ghost, the entire Qingshui circle will come to kill you. Don't use the name Su Li for a long time. Black Lotus transmitted the sound seriously, which was rare. Su Li took a breath slightly and looked at the people sitting in the room in turn. Her eyes regained calmness. "I believe you have a lot of doubts, especially the two little guys Bei Xiaoliang and Qi Qin." As soon as Su Li said this, Mo Qin and Li Hai were stunned and turned their eyes. Bei Xiaoliang scratched his head and said awkwardly, "Senior sister apprentice, you have changed so much that my junior fellow apprentice and I dare not recognize you." Senior sister apprentice. Mo Qin was shocked. She turned her head and stared at Su Li's strange face. Her lips trembled. "You are Li." Li Hai frowned, trying to find a trace of familiarity from Su Li's face, but he failed. Su Li pursed her lips slightly and said indifferently, although my surname is also Su, unfortunately, I am not. Elder Mo Chin, I respect you as the master of that person, so as long as you have a good relationship with her, I will give preferential treatment. As she said, she turned her head and looked at Bei Xiaoliang. She smiled jokingly. In the secret realm of shattered spirits, I didn't want to reveal my identity, so I casually made up a senior sister apprentice. Now if you call me that, the misunderstanding will be big. Bei Xiaoliang scratched his head and said embarrassedly, I am being rude. You are not. The light in Mo Chin's eyes dissipated, and she was full of loss. She should have given up long ago, but why did she always have hope? Although I am not. Su Li's eyes narrowed slightly. I have many former subordinates of that person. Needless to say, Hua Yan, others such as Yan Zai and Ling Qinglan are all her former subordinates in the reincarnation mirror, so you can trust me. Yan Zai. Those are all former talents of holy sects. Li Hai seemed to know more. He frowned and thought for a moment. He raised his head and asked cautiously, so, why do you take advantage of Holy Girl Su's power and painstakingly plan to unify the Zhuzhou region? Deputy Lord Li deserves to be the future lord of Yushu sect. Su Li smiled sweetly, and her eyes flickered. How about we make a deal? She raised her eyebrows, and a dangerous light flashed in her eyes. You should understand that anyone who has a relationship with that person will be on the opposite side of all holy sections. And you have a closer relationship with that person. If you are driven out of the Zhuzhou region, your fate. I don't need to say more. If I want to continue to develop, I need more help. Li Hai frowned more and more tightly. He naturally knew that what the woman in front of him said was true. Because of this, he wanted to know whether it was worth staying in NI sect. What do you want to say? Su Li chuckled, and her tone became serious. How about all of you come to help me? Especially you, Li Hai, you are a rare talent. If you come to be the deputy lord of NI sect, it will be convenient to protect the people you want to protect, right? Slowly you will find that we are the same kind of people. Chapter 539. Li Hai finally agreed to Su Li's deal. From the moment the conversation ended, he took over the mess of Yushu sect. In his view, the deal that Su Zhuzhou said was simply a disguised threat, and he had no room to refuse. Not to mention the difficulty of leaving Zhuzhou region. Just the moment he refused, Mo Chin and others would fall into an extremely dangerous situation with him. Whether they lived or died depended on Su Zhuzhou. Even if Su Li really came back to life and stood in front of them and said this sentence, he had to consider whether Su Li would choose to destroy because of the truth. What's more, the woman in front of him was not Su Li at all, but a stranger in the name of Su Li. It was entirely possible that she would be angry and kill him secretly. What if he chooses to refuse? In the quiet room of books, Hua Yan asked with a smile. Su Li's eyes flickered, and she said softly, if he really refuses, I won't do anything to them. At most, I will put them under house arrest and not allow them to leave. Otherwise, if Master falls into the hands of the enemy, I will be restrained. Speaking of this, she raised her eyebrows and smiled again. I have seen through Bijue's eyes what kind of person Li Hai is. He will not take risks for Master. Similarly, for the safety of Master, he will do his best to do things for NI sect. The safer NI sect is, the more stable they will be, right? Hua Yan said helplessly, you are still the same as before. You like to calculate. No, Yan, you are wrong. Su Li retorted with a smile. She looked down at her white palm clenched into a fist, and murmured, if I have enough strength, why do I have to think so much? Hua Yan was stunned, and immediately smiled. You are right. Well, you are the Lord of Ni sect, who has unified the Jojo region. You come to me specially. You are not here to gossip, are you? Su Li teased, and Hua Yan suddenly rolled her eyes. Li, you have learned to make up your best friend? You are the real master of Ni sect. Don't you feel ashamed to say so? As she said, she threw out a jade slip. Here is the list of all the spies of holy sections. You can decide how to deal with them. After yesterday's war, Ni sect has moved and integrated into Yushu sect, and its reputation is not prominent in the world. Except for Zihan sect, other sects have also found candidates. What to do next depends on your decision. Su Li stretched out her hand, and the jade slip fell into her hand. After scanning it with her divine awareness, she rested her chin on one hand and showed a thoughtful expression. Hua Yan didn't disturb him. She sat at the side and waited quietly. The room became quiet. After she drank the third cup of tea, she suddenly raised her head, and her eyes were slightly fierce. Hua Yan immediately took out a blank jade slip from her interspatial ring and began to record. I will solve the matter of Zihan sect. It is not the time for us to be exposed. All the spies of holy sects must be firmly controlled. Second, there must be some people in Jojo region who have escaped the net. They have already sent the news to holy sects, but only a word or two. Holy sects will at most send someone to probe. Let Yen Zai keep an eye on the teleporter. No suspicious person can be let go. Thirdly, let all sects hold the grand competition for cultivation, and the selected people would come to Yushu sect to fight as before. The top 20 could go to Xingxian Mountain to participate in the Tianzhou contest. Fourthly, use the intelligence route in your hand to find out where the big tactical matrix blocking Qimo's circle is. Hua Yan frowned when she heard the jade slip in her hand. Qimo's circle? Is it the chaos zone that turned Dafu region into a dead place? Yes. Su Li's eyes were deep. Don't you find that there are very few matrix masters in the entire Jojo region? Reminded by Su Li, Hua Yan was suddenly shocked and suddenly understood. Yes. Su Guahong, the strong matrix master of Su family, has been missing for thousands of years. In Junlo group, I found only small fries and crab generals. There are hardly any matrix masters above high grade. Even Yushu sect, which is strong in matrix, can't see a few matrix masters, so we took the opportunity to break in. Otherwise, the holy tactical matrix that protects Yushu sect can't be broken no matter how much time we have. Is it? Under Hua Yan's surprised gaze, Su Li nodded. I think it over and over again, and I always feel that it has something to do with Qimo's circle. I once heard the news that the war in Qimo's circle should have started 4 years ago, but there was no movement at all. It's so strange. Hua Yan looked slightly serious. I see. I'll arrange an informant to inquire about it. Su Li nodded, but Hua Yan seemed to suddenly think of something. She squinted and smiled. Li, you are more than qualified to participate in the Tianzhou contest. Are you interested in taking a place? Me? Su Li was slightly stunned. She had been making arrangements behind the scenes these years, but she forgot her body. She was a young girl in the prime of her youth. The dignified lord of Jojo region can also participate in the Tianzhou contest. Hua Yan covered her hot face, and her eyes were full of yearning. If we succeed and make everything public to the world, what kind of legend will this be passed down by future generations? Su Li laughed, but she really thought about the feasibility of this matter. According to Xianan, Xingxian Mountain was suppressed by the Tianzhou list, and the mysteries of heaven were obscured. She didn't worry about being found out by others. The only thing she needed to pay attention to was to control her power well and not expose too much to provoke the nerves of natural law. This matter might be difficult before the breakthrough of Suiyu tactics. But now the gray membrane in her body was thickened again. Even if she used the power comparable to Huashan realm, the natural law had no reaction. Thinking of this, Suli thought of another thing, and couldn't help but have a headache. The external incarnation in her hand was almost exhausted, and she couldn't attract the thunder for punishment. Su Bai would not only starve, but also affect his continued growth. It couldn't be delayed. Yen, I once asked you to investigate the big region with a lot of ghosts. Did you find anything? When Suli mentioned this, Hua Yen suddenly smiled. Speaking of this, I found something interesting. Ha! Suli was slightly stunned, and Hua Yen continued, do you still remember the Linli building? Suli's expression changed slightly, and she said softly, of course. By bribing a lord of Tainik Attic, I found out that the base camp of the Linli building is hidden in the Yinyang region with a lot of ghosts. The holy sects sent many groups of seniors to explore it, but because of the special nature of the Yinyang region, they all returned without success. Special? Suli raised her eyebrows. How special? I heard that the Yinyang region, as its name suggests, is half of the extreme Yin level, and the other half of the extreme Yang level. The two are obviously completely contradictory, but strangely balanced. In the crack between the two extreme areas, it is the area where the five elements are completely chaotic. No matter what tracking method is used, it will be completely ineffective. Many desperados who are chased by the holy sects are there. Speaking of this, Hua Yan's tone was firm. I heard that the core of the Linli building is hidden in the crack, and the status of the force there is quite objective. It is one of the only three forces that control a stable space. What are the other two forces? Suli narrowed her eyes, but Hua Yan shook her head. That's all I got. You may know other information when you go to the Yinyang region. There are many ghosts in the extreme Yin area. Although ordinary practitioners can't survive there, it should be okay for you to stay there for a short time with your strength. Suli nodded. There is still half a year before the Tianjiao battle in the Xingxian mountain begins. I still have enough time. If I don't come back by then, I will meet you in the Xingxian mountain. Hua Yan stared at her with her almond-shaped eyes. The Zhouzhou region has not been stabilized yet. Are you going to leave now? Of course not. Suli smiled apologetically. The holy sects won't be too slow. After dealing with the people of the holy sects, I will set off immediately. For the future of the Ni sect, I have to continue to enhance my strength, right? Hua Yan rolled her eyes and said angrily, this is really a qualified reason to be a hands-off boss. Suli chuckled, I believe that you can handle the rest with your ability. I will sell the Zhouzhou region later. Hua Yan said fiercely, and couldn't help laughing again, that's a deal. Our lord of the Zhouzhou region, remember to get a good ranking on the list of Tianjiao top 10,000 this time. Suli smiled indifferently and did not answer. Hua Yan immediately understood and floated away. Since her friend decided to take action, the little guys of this generation would be out of luck. After a few days, the teleportation matrix of the cultivation city under the control of Yushu's sect finally lit up one after another, and figures with extraordinary temperament appeared one after another. On this day, a red light flashed through the teleportation matrix, and two figures appeared. Whoosh! There was a faint voice of conversation in the sound of the teleportation matrix closing. Senior fellow apprentice, you are really worrying too much. I think the spy must have been outside for a long time and was unwilling to give up, so he spread such a rumor. Haven't the sect master and elders already confirmed with the other sects that there's no such thing as a sect war? It's a matter of great importance. Whether it's a lie or not, we have to come and see. The older one stepped out of the teleportation matrix and looked at the peaceful and backward streets of the city, and his thoughts were relaxed. It seemed to be a rumor. If there was a war, such a peaceful atmosphere would have been destroyed long ago. To be cautious, let's go to Yushu's sect again. Okay, senior fellow apprentice. After the two finished talking, they walked into an inn together and closed the door. 3 days later, the two walked out of the inn talking and laughing. Under the strange eyes of pedestrians, they held their fists to a mass of air and walked into the teleportation matrix politely. After the two completely disappeared, Suli walked out of the darkness with the little black cat in her arms, and her eyes were indifferent. Yen Zai beside her couldn't help but sigh, "Master, the power of hay is really surprising. In this way, we can directly save a lot of effort. The Zhuozhou region can be peaceful until the Battle of Tianjiao. At that time, any holy sects will not be afraid of them." Suli smiled and said, "I can't do it alone. You should also practice hard." "Of course." Suli responded and glanced at the sky. It seems that this is the last wave of spies. Among the 81 holy sects in Qingshui's circle, 60 waves of spies have come. They really care about the Zhuozhou region. Yen Zai nodded solemnly. The number is more than the number of spies. It seems that we still have a party of spies that we haven't caught. It is that person who leaked the information. I will leave tomorrow. I don't need to say more about the next thing. Suli turned around and walked away slowly. Before leaving, she suddenly remembered that there was one more thing to do. Chapter 540. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. In the underground ice dungeon. Rumble, the stone door was opened, and the moist wind blew from the entrance. It instantly formed beautiful ice flowers and fell at Suli's feet. As the stone door was closed again, Suli's eyes darkened a little. She stepped out and flashed into the depths like a phantom. After a while, she stopped in front of a small iceberg. At the bottom of the iceberg, a dense chain of forbidden spirits penetrated and entangled the pale woman sitting on the ice. This woman was Fong Ling. In just a few days, Fong Ling's ruddy face had been frozen pale, and her lips were purple. However, her expression seemed very dead. It seemed that this suffering could not touch her at all. Fong Ling seemed to sense the change of light. Then she slowly raised her head and opened her eyes. After seeing the person clearly, her stiff face finally had a slight change, and her frozen lips opened and closed with difficulty. "It's you, it's me." Suli smiled lightly and sat down directly on the cold ground in front of Fong Ling. "Do you know me?" Fong Ling smiled faintly. "Su Zhuozhou, the Grand Elder of Ni's sect who only took 2 days to unify the Zhuozhou region. Now, everyone in the 25 sects knows you. I turned out to be so famous." Suli tilted her head and seemed to be a little distressed. Seeing this, Fong Ling's smile became deeper. It was not her, but so what? She saw many familiar faces, including Yen Zai, Ling Qinglan, and many people who still missed her. Since there was someone who could gather these people together to avenge her, then she wouldn't have any regrets. Thinking of this, she hesitated for a moment and took the initiative to ask, "What are you doing here?" Suli narrowed her eyes slightly. "You don't seem to be afraid of me at all." "Afraid? Why should I be afraid?" Fong Ling stared at Suli. "I should have ended all this long ago, but I couldn't help it. Since such a person like you appeared, I can die without regrets." Suli looked at Fong Ling silently. She couldn't distinguish or believe it anymore. What happened before was still vivid in her mind. If it weren't for Mei Ruhan, her bracelet wouldn't have been broken. As for the blessing in disguise, it naturally couldn't be attributed to Mei Ruhan. For example, Yen Zai and Ling Qinglan were kept in the dark and sent to the reincarnation mirror. After they came out, their temperaments changed greatly. They were completely tied up by the emotional shackles of the mirror world and gave up everything to wander outside. She could trust them. As for Fong Ling, How could she believe that she would continue to be a holy sect in Yushu's sect and enjoy the best cultivation resources after coming out? Fong Ling naturally couldn't sense Su Li's hesitation. Seeing that the woman in front of her didn't speak for a long time, she didn't care and continued, although you have now gained a firm foothold, there are two things I want to remind you. The first thing is the spy of the holy sections. I have heard from the Grand Elder of Yushu's sect that there are more than one spy of the holy sects in Jojo region. If your existence is known by the holy sects, there will be a hard fight. It's not your turn to worry about this. Su Li smiled coldly. However, you are the holy girl of Yushu's sect. Logically speaking, you should regard me as an enemy. I didn't expect that you would actually think for your enemy. Enemy? Fong Ling took a deep look at Su Li and turned her head away. Her voice was very soft. We are not enemies. Su Li curled her lips with a touch of sarcasm. You said there are two things. Then, what is the second thing? Fong Ling's eyes dimmed slightly. After a long silence, she finally said, the second thing is the Grand Elder of Yushu's sect. Although he has been missing for a long time, I heard from my master that the Grand Elder is still alive. He is comparable to the existence of Junior Emperor in the ancient cultivation period. You have to be careful. Your master. Su Li's eyes flashed. Your master. Who is he? Ding Yen. Or Yao Shuangya? None of them. They are just in Huashan realm. How can they compare with my master? Fong Ling shook her head, and there was a hint of struggle in her eyes. My master, although she is heinous and has done so many wrong things, she treats me really well. Su Li looked at Fong Ling calmly. So, is this the reason why you continue to stay in Yushu's sect? I remember that you have a senior sister apprentice who is also in the ice prison, but I didn't see her this time. Where is she? Su Li suddenly said. Fong Ling's delicate body trembled slightly, and the face with deep eye sockets appeared in her mind. However, with a smile on her face, she said softly, since you have gathered so many of her subordinates, I have long guessed that you will ask this. But the senior sister apprentice is not like me. Her consciousness in the mirror world is split from her body, and the two are in conflict with each other. Since she came out, she has become a complete lunatic. Su Li listened silently. It turned out that Mei Ruhan was really crazy. She remembered the scene when she met her a few years ago. The skeleton-like figure could still be clearly recalled. However, I later found that the consciousness of senior sister apprentice Mei in the mirror world gradually swallowed the original consciousness. In most cases, she had returned to normal, but she could not forgive herself, so she pretended to be crazy and tortured herself. Until I heard that the master wanted to strip her soul and use it as the core of the tactical matrix. Su Li's pupils shrank, and her voice was imperceptibly bitter. Mei Ruhan is dead. Was that the last time she saw her? Fong Ling's voice became more and more low and hoarse. She shook her head and said, Senior Sister Apprentice has killed the consciousness of Holy Girl Su who killed Sister Li. She did nothing wrong and shouldn't be killed by the master. So, Luo Yichen and I made a plan to send the Senior Sister Apprentice out of Jojo region. I see. The lines on Su Li's face were much gentler. On the one hand, you can't forget the master, and on the other hand, you are against the master's will. You are a surprisingly contradictory person. Fong Ling bit her lips, and pain flashed through her eyes. But she smiled and said, Thank you for the compliment, Region Lord. Su Li smiled slightly. Since you have revealed so much, I will change a better environment for you. At least, you will not end up freezing to death like your lord and others. Hearing Su Li's words, Fong Ling was disappointed. If I had known it, I would not have said so much to you. Su Li chuckled and turned to leave. But she heard Fong Ling speak again behind her. This time, the voice was extremely heavy. Be careful of my master. What about her? Su Li turned her head, only to see Fong Ling lowered her head, and her face could not be seen clearly. Fong Ling continued to say, she is a person who is more difficult to deal with than the Grand Elder of Yushu sect. Even joining Yushu sect is also calculated. Be careful. Su Li raised her eyebrows. What's your master's name? What answered her was silence. The air stagnated for a moment, and Su Li turned and disappeared at the end of the ice road. She didn't ask, because it was meaningless. Since Yushu's sect was easily won by her, it was enough to prove that Fong Ling's master was not in the sect. Rumble, the sound of the stone door closing came from far away. After the light dimmed, Fong Ling suddenly clutched her chest, and the blood-red mark between her eyebrows flickered constantly. The mark flickered faster and faster, and finally collapsed suddenly. Fong Ling only felt blood rushing up her throat, and she opened her mouth to spit out a dark red. Phew! Fong Ling let out a long breath and leaned against the cold stone wall, gasping for air. She only vaguely reminded her, but it triggered the inhibition set in her mind by her master. Master, in the world of ice and snow, a long sigh lingered. Hua Yen, I'm leaving. Su Li stood in front of the door, and looked back at the extremely simple quiet room. I'll stay in the sect. This time, it has launched dozens of dreams in a row, and it really needs a rest. The little black cat lying in the cat's nest seemed to hear its master's concern, and it meowed softly. Hua Yen nodded, and her voice was clear and firm, don't worry. I'm here. Su Li smiled, and no longer said anything. She turned into a streamer and disappeared into the sky. In the desolate desert, the scorching sun was hanging high. Two figures could be seen from afar, one in front and the other in the back, moving forward in the wind and smoke. Suddenly, a gust of wind came and rolled up the sand. Su Buwang didn't check it for a moment, and his mouth was immediately stuffed with sand. Baw, baw, baw. Su Buwang spat, straightened up, touched his dry throat, and said helplessly, Uncle Fong, haven't we arrived yet? Fong Yuan tightened the cloth on his face, and looked at the undulating and boundless desert in the distance. Soon. If the map is correct, we will meet the crack in 2 days. 2 days. Su Buwang pulled a long face, raised his head, and fell on the soft sand powerlessly. He squinted at the fiery red Jinwu in the sky. We have been walking for a whole month. This yin and yang region is so special. It is not only vast, but also the protective spiritual shield can't block the sand. Fong Yuan sat aside and grabbed a handful of extremely hot sand. If you don't neglect your practice and step into the late stage of Yuaning realm, these sand will be able to block you. Uncle Fong, are you still a human? Su Buwang sat up with grief and indignation, pointed at Fong Yuan's nose and complained. In just 10 years, I suddenly stepped from the early stage of Jindan realm to the middle stage of Yuaning realm. You almost wasted my practice. Do you think it's easy for me? Even so, you still think I am slow. Fong Yuan's face was slightly serious. Today is different from the past. No one cared about you before. Now that you are with me, your cultivation can't be lagged. Do you want to lose face in front of your mother? Su Buwang scratched his head, and his eyes were a little confused. My mother. So many years have passed. Is my mother still alive? She must be alive. Fong Yuan's cold eyes were slightly dim, but his voice was low and firm. Yes. Su Buwang nodded. After a moment of silence, he asked again, Uncle Fong, how do you know that my mother may be in the yin and yang region? I saw that your face changed when you heard the words Linli building. Does it have anything to do with my mother? He had wanted to ask more specifically. After traveling with Fong Yuan for these years, he probably guessed that Uncle Fong had something to do with his mother. But every time he asked about his mother's origin, he couldn't get an answer. What kind of person was his mother on earth? Was she noble or humble? Since she had a relationship with such a mysterious and powerful uncle, she couldn't be the maid mentioned by the Lord Evil Emperor. So, was she beautiful or ugly? Was she fat or thin? Was his personality gentle or forceful? Su Buwang often thought so, and even often dreamed of a woman, but he couldn't see her face clearly. When Fong Yuan heard the words leanly building, his eyelids twitched, and he turned his head away. How should he answer? Should he say that the woman had died for more than 1,000 years, and the enemy was the holy sex in the world? The murderer who killed your mother was not only your father, but also me. This answer was too heavy. What was the benefit of letting Su Buwang bear it? Since Lingli was not cruel enough to tell him the truth, then, how could he bear it? Uncle Fong, look. What is that? Chapter 541. Fong Yuan looked at her in confusion. He saw a seemingly ethereal and light black figure in the wind and sand, but she was as still as a mountain in the strong wind and walked forward firmly and calmly. Didn't the senior say that this place is deserted? She can still see other people. Su Buwang clicked his tongue in wonder. Is it possible that she is also protected by the river magic weapon like the one you gave me, Uncle Fong? Fong Yuan frowned slightly. Ordinary practitioners couldn't stay in either the negative extreme area or the positive extreme area of the yin-yang region. Even he could only hold on for half a year at most. If it weren't for the Milky Way, he wouldn't dare to bring Su Buwang here. Seeing that the figure was not fast, Fong Yuan only hesitated for a moment and said, "Let's go and have a look." Okay. Su Buwang smiled and stood up like a carp. He patted the sand on his body and said excitedly, "Maybe she is a fairy sister." Fong Yuan shook his head slightly. At this time, he was full of enthusiasm. Fong Yuan didn't know who he got such a slippery temperament from. After that, they sped up and chased after her. Sensing that two Numas were approaching quickly behind her, Su Li, who deliberately slowed down, calmed down her fluctuating eyes, but slightly pursed her lips with imperceptible bitterness. At this time and place, she met the two of them. She knew that it was not the right time and she should avoid them, but she couldn't control her feet after all. "Fellow Daoist, please wait." A familiar and somewhat cold voice came into her ears. Su Li took a deep breath and turned around. Her cold face suddenly became gentle and soft. Her long and narrow eyes narrowed, and her eyelashes trembled slightly. A chuckle came from under the black veil. "The wind and sand are all over the sky. Why do you stop me?" She was used to showing people with coldness, but she didn't know what kind of touching charm she pretended to be this time. For a moment, Fong Yuan and Su Buwang were both absent-minded. "She is really a fairy sister," Su Buwang muttered to himself. Su Li was reincarnated, so there was no blood connection. He didn't realize that the woman in front of him was the mother he had been looking for, and he didn't recognize that she was the female senior who gave him benefits for no reason in Han's sect. With only the all-spirits method, as long as Su Li wanted, no one would know her real identity. Fong Yuan was absent-minded, but he was disappointed, not because of the beauty under the black veil. He once had some expectations in his heart. She had something to do with the yin-yang region. Maybe. But this woman's temperament was not similar to her at all, which made his hope disappear instantly. Thinking of this, Fong Yuan retracted his gaze, held his fist and said calmly, "Sorry to bother you. I just saw you walking alone here, so I am a little curious." Su Li chuckled and said, "Indeed, the yin-yang region is not a safe place. I am also worried. If you don't mind, how about going with me?" Fong Yuan immediately frowned and was about to refuse, but Su Buwang jumped out and said, "Of course. It's inconvenient for elder sister to be outside alone, so it's better to have two people to take care of me. Suli didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she heard what Su Buwang called her, but she covered her mouth and smiled on the surface. Thank you, little brother. Su Buwang blushed and scratched his head. Fong Yuan turned his head helplessly. Since Su Buwang agreed and the other party also thanked him, he couldn't say anything more. In this way, the three of them set off together. After walking for half a day, Fong Yuan looked up at the scorching sun that seemed to never set. When he just took out the map to compare, he found that his hand was empty, and the map had been taken by Su Li. His eyes were cold, and he was about to say something, but another more delicate map fell into his hand. The map fell into his hand. How about using this map, child? A delicate voice came. Fong Yuan looked down and glanced at it. His expression was slightly relaxed. Your map is indeed more accurate. But next time, please tell me in advance, so as not to cause misunderstanding. Su Li raised her eyebrows. After so many years, Fong Yuan was still a blockhead. Seeing that the atmosphere was not very good, Su Buwang quickly stood up to smooth things over. Sister, don't lower yourself to Uncle Fong's level. He is a blockhead, and he doesn't know how to cherish women. If he offends you, please forgive him. Ha! Su Buwang. Fong Yuan looked a little annoyed. It seems that I have been too indulgent to you recently. I have to change my practice plan. Su Buwang looked frightened, and Su Li immediately chuckled. Fong Yuan realized that there were outsiders on the scene, and it was not appropriate to teach Su Buwang a lesson. While feeling slightly sorry in his heart, he couldn't help but ask, Miss, what are you laughing at? Nothing. Su Li flipped the hair on her forehead, turned her head, and revealed the black and purple lotus mark at the corner of her eyebrows. She whispered, I just think that the relationship between you and your uncle and nephew is really good. Fong Yuan was stunned and did not answer. Just at that moment, he noticed a trace of sincere envy from that sentence. Maybe the woman in front of him was not as unrestrained as she looked. Let's go. We can enter the Yinyang region in a day and a half. Fong Yuan said. Although his words were still emotionless, his tone was much more relaxed, which surprised Su Buwang greatly. What happened just now? Su Li squinted and smiled, and then she followed him. Although he was still a blockhead, his mind was still as meticulous as before. 24 hours. Su Buwang lay and counted the time with his fingers. He licked his dry lips and said weakly, but his voice was hoarse. Uncle, why haven't we arrived yet? I'm dying. No matter how powerful Tianhe was, Su Buwang's cultivation was too low, and he couldn't protect it for a long time. Fong Yuan was anxious. He clenched the map in his hand and frowned. The map mark is clearly here. Why is there no entrance? Su Li walked gently to Su Buwang and suddenly held his hand. Su Buwang was shocked and wanted to withdraw his hand. Although he was optimistic, he didn't relax his vigilance at all. But with Su Li's cultivation, he couldn't escape if she wanted to catch him. The next moment, a cold pneuma flowed into the tendons and meridians along his wrist, and instantly smoothed out the burning pain and heat in his body. His dry lips also quickly became moist. Su Buwang stopped withdrawing his hand and sat up energetically. Sister, what did you inject into my body? I feel much more comfortable. I was wondering how you could resist the extreme yang fire poison with ordinary cultivation. It turns out that there is a treasure in your body. As Su Li said, she looked at Fong Yuan, whose face became unkind again, and her tone became more unkind. Although your treasure is a protective treasure, the effect of low-grade extreme yang fire poison is very limited. This guy is also a taciturn person. The fire poison in his body is stagnant and has burned his internal organs, but he doesn't say a word. If I find it a little later, it will affect his foundation. Fong Yuan's face changed slightly when he heard the words. He didn't have time to study the map anymore. He walked to Su Buwang in a few steps and grabbed his other hand. After a while, he suddenly showed shame and self-blame. I was careless. He stared at Su Buwang's face. Silly boy, why didn't you say it was painful? Su Buwang smiled awkwardly. I didn't know the consequences were so serious. I didn't know the consequences would be so serious. Besides, it's not that painful. Compared with those years in Xingtian Shrine, this pain was really nothing. Fong Yuan's eyes darkened. Although he understood Su Buwang's meaning, he didn't know how to answer and could only be silent. After a while, he raised his head and looked at Su Li with apologetic eyes. I'm sorry. This time. I wronged you again. Su Li rolled her eyes. Child, you wronged me many times along the way, right? You men are still too careless in taking care of children. You brought him to the Yinyang region at such a young age. You are really careless. I'm not young. Su Buwang sat in the middle and protested. I'm more than 1,000 years old. Sister, you look younger than me. I like this sentence. Su Li smiled sweetly and slightly raised her lips. Remember to say more nice words in the future. I have some good things here that I am reluctant to use. Maybe if you make me happy, I will give them all to you. Su Buwang's face turned red again. He was really not good at dealing with female practitioners, especially the one in front of him was very beautiful. Since Brother Buwang is fine for the time being, don't worry too much. After confirming Su Buwang's situation again, Su Li said to Fong Yuan, in my opinion, extreme yin generates yang, and extreme yang generates yin. Maybe it is related to the alternation of sun and moon and the time. We might as well wait for another 24 hours. Maybe it won't be so long before we see the change. Fong Yuan nodded. That's the only way. The atmosphere was silent for a while, but Fong Yuan was thinking about the healing method used by the masked woman just now. The treasure of Tianhe was indeed not good at defending against the fire poison of extreme yang, but it was also a protective treasure. It was definitely not as weak as the woman said. The woman did not show her cultivation along the way, but her healing method alone showed that she was by no means an ordinary person. Is there such a person in the holy sect of Qingshui Circle? Did the Grand Elder of Xian House make a new breakthrough after I left the sect? The breath of the woman in front of me is young. She is definitely not an old person. It's weird. After thinking about it, Fong Yuan hesitated for a long time and finally couldn't help asking. Girl, I have a question to ask, but I don't know if I should ask. Since you know it's presumptuous, why do you still ask? Fong Yuan blinked and was a little confused. Su Buwang had a hard time holding back his laughter. Uncle Fong was such a proud person, but there were times when he was defeated. Ha! Fortunately, he remembered that his practice plan was still controlled by Fong Yuan in time, so he didn't laugh out loud. Time passed by the 10th hour in a strange silence. Ha! Su Li suddenly narrowed her eyes. She stood up and looked at the side with his back to the sun. Sister, what's wrong? Su Buwang was confused and followed her to look, but there was nothing there. After 3 breaths, Fong Yuan finally looked slightly serious. He stood beside Su Li and said in a deep voice, Girl, your 5 senses are so sharp. Your cultivation should be above mine. Su Li's eyes flashed. Child, you flatter me. Come here. Fong Yuan's eyes were stern. Please take care of Buwang, girl. Then, before Su Li said anything, he rushed out with the white light of the flying sword in an instant. Su Li helplessly protected Su Buwang, who was still confused. I have said that my cultivation is above yours. You men really like to show off." The next moment, a huge and ferocious shadow rose from the ground in front of him. Su Buwang opened his eyes in horror. He finally understood what they meant. What the hell was that? Chapter 542. I smell the smell of a living person. The black shadow finally stretched out its body completely. It was a huge black tree with a height of dozens of meters, which shrouded Su Li and Su Buwang in a shadow. Suddenly, a bright sword light lit up out of thin air and penetrated the back of the black tree. Fong Yuan, who was hiding behind the black tree, changed his face slightly. He clearly stabbed it, but why did it feel like he stabbed in the air? Ha ha ha, there are still little bugs who dare to attack me. Hundreds of distorted human faces suddenly appeared on the giant tree, and thousands of black eyes opened at the same time. Su Buwang was so disgusted that he almost vomited. "Sister, what is this? It's so ugly." As soon as the words came out, the human faces who were still looking for Fong Yuan stopped, and immediately all their eyes fell on Su Buwang. Su Buwang was stunned. He didn't know why his mind suddenly went blank, and he couldn't move. "Idiot, run away." Fong Yuan's sound transmission exploded crazily in his ears, but his body felt tight under his feet because of the flaw in the sound transmission this time. He had been entangled by a black vine. The next moment, the vine swung fiercely, boom. Fong Yuan smashed into the desert like a meteor. Uncle Fong. Su Buwang, who came back to his sense, saw this scene, and his face suddenly changed wildly. Before he rushed out, he felt that his body was light, and he was already in the air. Boom! The vines where he originally stood dispersed, and there was a huge pit. Su Buwang suddenly broke into a cold sweat. "Little bug, how dare you say that I'm ugly?" The ghost's unique voice came from hundreds of mouths, and countless black vines shot at him. Even if the cold breath hadn't touched him, he couldn't help but tremble. Uncle Fong, Su Buwang's strength was still too weak. In front of such a monster, he could only wait for death helplessly. Seeing that he couldn't avoid it, he was still worried about the safety of Fong Yuan. Suddenly, he vaguely heard a cold snort. The dense black vines instantly stopped at the same time, and the face tree's sight fell on Su Li, who had no sense of existence all the time. However, with just one look, he was instantly horrified. How could it be? Lord Hong Baizhu is still alive. Rumble, the gigantic human face tree suddenly began to dig madly into the ground. At this moment, he was even vaguely regretting his arrogance in revealing his true form. It was too troublesome to escape now. Su Li watched the human-faced tree escape with calm eyes. The bloody tears in her eyes disappeared. "Master, I want to eat." Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. "I'll give you 3 breaths. You scared my son Su Buwang. He shouldn't be alive, do you know?" "I understand." Sensing the evil spirit in Su Li's words, the little girl retreated with trepidation. After 3 breaths, the pneuma of the face tree that had escaped into the ground disappeared as expected. The little girl didn't run around and return to Zhanglei's cave. The aura has become even more annoying. On the other side of Zhanglei's cave, Su Bai touched his hungry and shriveled stomach and sighed. "Sister, I want to eat delicious food, too." Escaped. Su Buwang blinked. Although he didn't understand what happened, it was not difficult to guess that the escape of the face tree must have something to do with this sister who had never been willing to reveal her name. "By the way, Uncle Fong." With no time to think, Su Buwang immediately rushed to the place where Fong Yuan was smashed and pushed away the hot sand with both hands. Su Li came close and made a gesture. Suddenly, a large piece of sand rolled aside. The sand rolled aside, revealing Fong Yuan in it. Su Buwang quickly picked up Fong Yuan with difficulty, and his face turned red. Damn it, Uncle Fong is very thin. Why is he so heavy? It's because your physical body is too weak. Brother Su, let me do it. Su Buwang felt his hands were light. When he saw the weak woman on the opposite side picked up the unconscious Fong Yuan with one hand, he couldn't help but be a little confused. For the first time, he doubted whether the practice plan Uncle Fong made for him was too little. Su Li gently put Fong Yuan on the ground. After a little examination, her tightly knitted eyebrows suddenly relaxed. It's not a big problem. He was poisoned with a little ghost poison. With the self-healing ability of his physical body, he will wake up soon. If he hadn't been worried about you, he wouldn't have exposed his flaws. Hearing what she said, Su Buwang breathed a sigh of relief, but he couldn't help blaming himself. He whispered bitterly, Uncle Fong gave me the treasure for protection. I'm really useless. Su Li chuckled and couldn't help touching Su Buwang's hair. She said softly, you are still young. I can't blame you for this. Since you understand the importance of strength, you should work hard to practice. Don't let Uncle Fong down. Do you understand? Su Buwang froze in place and obediently let Su Li touch his hair. He didn't dare to move. This feeling, he had never felt it. If Mother was by my side, would she also often touch my hair, whisper to me, show concern for my well-being, and give me advice? Thinking about it, Su Buwang felt that his eyes were a little wet. Suddenly, he was embarrassed and lowered his head. It's good to see you grow up healthily. Su Li thought secretly. She smiled and withdrew her hand. I cast a lightning spell on your Uncle Fong. Carry him on your back. It's time for us to enter the Yinyang region. Su Buwang wiped his eyes without a trace. He looked up at the direction pointed by Su Li and couldn't help but be surprised. There was a twisted crack there. With his eyesight, he could vaguely see the appearance of the city inside. When did it appear? Su Buwang thought a little confusedly. He carried Fong Yuan on his back and followed Su Li into the crack. After a short period of darkness, Fong Yuan frowned and moved his eyebrows. He suddenly opened his eyes and straightened up like a corpse coming back to life. Su Buwang, who was watching on the side, jumped up in fright. Although his expression was exaggerated, he was much calmer. Uncle Fong, you finally wake up. The sister is right. It's only been 4 hours. Fong Yuan looked at Su Buwang carefully. Seeing that he had no injury, he was relieved. Then he had time to look around. It was a well-decorated room. Where is this place? Of course, it's the Yinyang region. Su Buwang sat down again. Uncle Fong, after you were sent flying by the ugly monster, the elder sister and the ugly monster fought so fiercely that the sky fell and the earth cracked, and the sun and moon lost their light. Speak human language. Fong Yuan was so angry that he laughed. This guy almost died, but he still had time to joke here. Just by looking at his expression, he knew that this guy was talking nonsense again. Su Buwang smiled embarrassedly and said, sure enough, nothing can escape your eyes. He scratched his head, I don't know the specific process. I just heard a cold hum, and then the ugly monster dug the ground and ran away crazily. I really don't understand. Uncle, do you have any idea? Ran away. Fong Yuan's eyes were slightly cold, and he was more afraid of the woman in black in his heart. He was born in a noble family and had a wide range of knowledge. Although he didn't know it this time, he also understood what he had encountered. And that woman could actually scare away a ghost with a cold hum. No matter how he thought about it, there was something very unusual in it. Thinking of this, Fong Yuan glanced at the room. But he didn't see anyone else. The sister went to inquire about the news. Her purpose is actually the same as ours. She came to the Linli building. Su Buwang said thoughtlessly. Fong Yuan was shocked, and the flame buried in the bottom of his heart couldn't help burning again. After thinking for a moment, Fong Yuan was about to get out of bed. At this moment, the door was suddenly pushed open. I advise you to lie down for a while. Although the human face tree is not a very powerful ghost, it will be trouble if you encounter the ghost poison. It's always right to be careful. Su Li changed into a more spacious black robe, which covered her graceful body. She no longer looked outstanding. Fong Yuan's eyes darkened, and he cupped his fists. Just now, thank you. You don't need to thank me. Su Li sat down at the table and poured a pot of tea for herself. We agreed when we traveled together that we could take care of each other. Now I just did what I should do. Fong Yuan withdrew his observation with some disappointment. In the reincarnation mirror, he stayed with Su Li all the time, so he knew all Su Li's little habits and preferences very well. Pouring tea with her right hand. She always used to use her left hand. Since we have arrived in the Yin-Yang region, I will come straight to the point. Su Li took a sip of tea and looked up. What I came here for is simple. I heard that the base camp of the Linli building is in the Yin-Yang region. I am really curious about the owner of the Linli building who dares to do such a risky thing under the nose of so many holy sections. There is only one owner of the Linli building. Fong Yuan stared at Su Li. Since you are so interested in it, it is impossible that you don't know the identity of the owner. Su Li covered her mouth and chuckled. She said carelessly, yes, I know. But that person is dead, isn't he? So, he must be the new owner. Fong Yuan's eyes became serious, but Su Li refuted. Why? Do you still think that person is still alive? Do you think it is possible that he is targeted by so many holy sects? Fong Yuan was silent. Even though he knew that what the woman said in front of him was true, he still didn't want to believe it. If he believed it, everything he did would be meaningless. I say. Uncle Fong, sister, who are you talking about? Su Buwang, who was eating melon seeds aside, finally interjected and asked. He didn't think about his mother at all. In his consciousness, the image of his mother was still the maid that Lingli said. Even if she had a relationship with Uncle Fong, it didn't mean anything. It just meant that his mother must be very beautiful. Otherwise, even the Emperor of Evil would be tempted and give birth to him with his mother. Of course, it is the owner of the Linli building. Su Li took a deep look at Su Buwang, and then turned to look at Fong Yuan, who was a little impatient, and said, Little brother, your understanding of the Qingshui circle is too low. If you have time, ask your Uncle Fong more. There are only advantages and no disadvantages. Do you know? Oh, being taught a lesson again. Su Buwang didn't feel disgusted at all. He scratched his head and thought of the thing that his head was touched before. Fong Yuan faintly breathed a sigh of relief. After a moment of silence, he said, Buwang and I come here to find someone. If we find her, we will leave. What should the girl do? Chapter 543. Of course, I want to join them. Su Li turned the teacup in her hand and said leisurely, I have nothing to do recently. It's rare for something to arouse my interest. Besides, if I don't join them, how can I meet the current owner of the Linli building? Fong Yuan habitually frowned slightly. This woman was too thoughtful and her words were mixed. It was hard to understand her. However, his intuition told him that it might not be a bad thing for this woman to join the Linli building. So, we have the same purpose for the time being. Before we find the Linli building, what do you think? Fong Yuan looked up at the woman in front of him. His eyes were naturally a little cold, which was not as clear as before. Su Li's eyes were full of gentleness. She gently put down the teacup and said with a smile, "That's right." As she said, she waved her hand casually. A black vortex appeared out of thin air, and then a handsome young man in yellow clothes came out. As soon as he came out, he trembled and knelt at the table. He said in a panic, "Forgive me. I will tell you everything." Su Li ignored him and said to Fang Yuan with a smile, "I just went out and found that the city was really chaotic. There were even people who stole things. So, I simply caught them and asked them." The young man in yellow stared at him. When did he steal things? He just got the order to monitor the foreign practitioners in the Yinyang region. But before he entered the inn, he blacked out and didn't know anything. I see. After experiencing the Jianyang desert, Fang Yuan's vigilance was reduced a lot. He didn't doubt Su Li's words. He immediately nodded and said, "Since you caught them, you can interrogate them. I will wait and see." Okay. Su Li leaned on the table and raised her eyebrows slightly. "Young man, what's your name?" The young man in yellow clothes was stunned. He looked away evasively and stammered, My surname is Li, young man." Su Li interrupted the young man in yellow clothes with a smile and said lightly, "I will give you another chance. If you lie again, don't blame me for being cruel. You should know that the soul-searching skill is the most abundant in the cultivation circle. It's not easy for me to be kind, but you are not willing to cooperate. You are really. I am Guo Fengyu." The young man in yellow immediately knelt straight and shouted loudly. Su Buwang almost laughed out loud. In this day and age, there weren't many people who could be so righteous and honest. Nice name. Su Li praised, "Little Guo, do you know the division of forces in the cultivation cities in the Yinyang region? If your answer satisfies this servant, I will let you go, and I will naturally not use any tricks." Hearing this, Guo Fengyou's eyes immediately lit up. "Of course I know. I was born in the Yinyang domain, and I've been making a living in Ju City since I was a child. There's no cultivation sect in this city that I don't know." "Very good, looks like I've asked the right person." Su Li chuckled, "Well, tell me about it." Guo Fengyu was stunned for a moment. He had a lot of information about the various forces in his mind, and he wanted to use the questions he was asked to find out the details of these people. However, the young girl in front of him seemed to be about the same age as him, and her mind was very cunning. She actually let him do as he wished. It's not very good. At such a critical moment, a powerful figure came. It must be for that. Guo Fengyu was very confused. Seeing that Su Li's eyes became more and more unkind, he finally couldn't bear it. He frowned and said, "Ju City is very big. Most of the people are desperados. It's very chaotic, but there is order in the chaos. Most practitioners are incorporated by the three forces in Ju City. I heard from my father that the three forces were the Baichuan Mansion, the Morning Soul House, and the Liang Villa about 800 years ago. Later, I don't know what happened. The Baichuan Mansion was suddenly incorporated by another completely strange force. That force is now the head of the three forces, the Linli Building." Hearing these three words from a stranger, both Su Li and Fang Yuan's eyes flashed, and they felt relieved at the same time. The information was true. The branch of Ju City is extremely long and narrow, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. The Linli Building occupied 60% of it in just 800 years, and the remaining 40% was divided by the Morning Soul House and the Liang Villa. As for other small sects, there are new ones almost every day. The old ones are destroyed, and I don't want to remember them. 800 years ago, Fang Yuan frowned and recalled. At that time, Qing Shui's circle was in chaos because of the breaking of the reincarnation mirror. The matter that he and Lingli trapped and killed 100,000 talents was also known by the senior officials of the sect. Therefore, he was grounded, and it was impossible to judge who could come here to establish a force at that time. It turns out that the Lingli building has been established for 800 years. Su Li thought, who on earth will persevere to fight against the holy sects for me? She glanced at Fang Yuan secretly. According to Fang Yuan's temperament, it was indeed possible. But, since Fang Yuan appeared here, it must not be there. Then, coldness flashed in Su Li's eyes, which made Guo Fengyo's heart beat fast. He couldn't even take care of his son well. He let him wander about and suffer all kinds of grievances. The evil emperor was really powerful. Senior, can this lowly one leave now? Guo Fengyo's careful voice brought Su Li back to reality. We were just talking and you want to leave already. Su Li squinted and smiled. Since you know everything, you should know where the three forces are, right? Well, Guo Fengyu said with some embarrassment, the other two forces are not difficult, but the Lingli building. This force has always been very mysterious. Not to mention the gate, even the members of this force can't be seen. Every time they take action, they cover their faces with spells and wear the same clothes. They stroll in the city on weekdays. Even the people selling sesame seed cakes on the roadside may be from the Lingli building. How can I know? The more Su Li listened, the colder her eyes were. Fang Yuan also frowned. He thought of a possibility that should not exist at all. Such a heartless person clearly drew a line with the reincarnation mirror as soon as he got the memory. But this force was similar to the Yinma cult in the reincarnation mirror. If it was really as he thought, it was meaningless to come here this time. Instead, it would expose his whereabouts to the Xingtian shrine. It's really troublesome. Su Li said softly and pointed at Guo Fengyu. The storage bag on Guo Fengyo's waist automatically fell off. Guo Fengyu was stunned and then turned pale with fright. He immediately stood up and wanted to grab it back. But he was no match for Su Li. His hands grasped nothing. You young man, your cultivation is not high and your mind is very simple. But you can live safe and sound until now. Su Li squinted and smiled. It seemed that the soul mark on the storage bag did not exist. She opened it slowly and said, "Let me see which force you come from." It's over. Guo Fengyo's eyes were blank and he collapsed on the ground. Ding! Clang! 2 jade tokens fell on the table. One was green and the other was white. The 2 words, Lingli, on the back were clearly visible. Su Li raised her eyebrows and said in a teasing tone, "Young man, it turns out that you are from the Lingli building, the first force in Juqing." I'm sorry. Oh. With a smile in her eyes, Su Li pretended to be flustered and said, "Then, I offended the Lingli building. Should I kill them?" No. Guo Fengyu squatted and covered his head. He shouted in fear, "Don't kill me. I finally became an official disciple of the Lingli building yesterday. My life is just." Ah. Su Buwang approached him and reluctantly withdrew his hand from Guo Fengyo's shoulder. Looking at Guo Fengyu, who was scared and twitching, he said helplessly, "Stop shaking. Don't you see that I am teasing you? You are such a good person. How can you kill innocent people?" "I am not a good person," Su Li refuted. She turned to look at Fang Yuan, who was thinking, and said with a smile, "Fellow practitioner Fang, are you interested in playing a play with me?" "Ha!" Fang Yuan was excited. A moment later. "Brother Su, how about my dress?" Su Li adjusted her hair and looked at Su Buwang with gentleness that the latter could not perceive in her eyes. Well, Su Buwang looked at the girl who changed into an emerald dress in front of him. On the top of the cyan translucent curtain, a pair of pure black eyes were as clear as water without any impurities. After her slightly messy hair, her waterfall-like black hair danced freely. She was really a budding girl who was pure and beautiful. She looked much more immature than him. Su Buwang couldn't help but twitch his mouth. "Sister, you are more beautiful than Uncle Fong," he couldn't help but continue. The beautiful sister who suddenly appeared not only had a higher cultivation than Uncle Fong, but also had a way to keep her appearance. Compared with Uncle Fong, who had been through many vicissitudes of life, she was much less sad and angry. Comparing oneself with others, Su Buwang sighed. Fong Yuan's eyelids twitched and he said calmly, "Shall we go or not?" Su Buwang shivered and said hurriedly, "Let's go. You always walk in front. Now you are the one with the highest cultivation in the whole team. You can take 2 siblings with weak cultivation to cross the Jianyang Desert." Su Li covered her mouth and chuckled, "Forget it. Fellow practitioner Fong, don't care about your nephew. You have to perform well. If you expose yourself, all our requests will be ruined." "Of course I can tell." Fong Yuan nodded expressionlessly, but he was a little unwilling in his heart. However, his image was really not suitable for him to pretend to be young and seek refuge in the Linli building. Fortunately, there was Buwang. Thinking of this, Fong Yuan was silent for a moment and couldn't help but transmit the sound in silence, "Miss, please take care of Buwang's safety." Su Li's eyes were shining, and she chuckled, "I will." Su Buwang looked at the two of them and scratched his head. "What are you talking about?" Guo Fengyu stood in front of the inn and listened to the 3 people talking and laughing. She thought desperately in her heart. "I have just become an official disciple. Am I going to betray the sect now? Here it is." Guo Fengyu opened the door cleverly and warmly invited Fong Yuan and the other 2 people to walk into the courtyard. She said incessantly, "Senior, the Linli building is definitely the best place for you to take care of your orphan. I know that if the Linli building hadn't adopted me as an off-staff disciple in the early years, I would have starved to death on the street. How could I live to this day?" Fong Yuan nodded gently and looked back to see 2 faces full of panic. His eyelids kept twitching. Chapter 544. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. "Why are you so noisy?" An old farmer carrying a hoe came out of the seemingly ordinary farmyard. Seeing the young man in yellow, the old man's angry face eased a little. It turns out to be Guo Fengyu. "Today you," in the middle of the words, the old man finally noticed Fong Yuan, who was extraordinary behind Guo Fengyu. The old man's original casual expression was immediately restrained, and his eyes were full of vigilance. "You are very unfamiliar." Guo Fengyu smiled embarrassedly. "Old Kai, didn't you ask me to monitor the outsider?" "Yes." The old man responded, put down the hoe, and put it on the side of the door. He made a gesture and said solemnly, "Your Excellency, do you want to talk in the house?" "Of course." Fong Yuan nodded, and then turned around and said, "You two wait outside the house. Don't run around." "Yes, Uncle Fong." Su Li and Su Buwang said yes. Fong Yuan's eyes flashed a touch of helplessness. He turned around and walked into the house with the farmer. Seeing this, Guo Fengyu couldn't help but worry. He was about to secretly transmit the sound to the farmer, but Su Li's leisurely voice came into his ears first. "Young man, we mean no harm. But if we have to kill him because of what you said, it will not be good." Guo Fengyu held her breath, and the sound was stuck in her throat. Although old Kai had joined the Linli building for many years, he usually made a living by planting spiritual rice. His cultivation was probably not high. Thanks to his care over these years, Guo Fengyu couldn't hurt him. It's really terrible. Guo Fengyu sighed in her heart. Old Kai was more important. The furnishings in the house were very old, just like an ordinary old farmer's house. But the moment Feng Yuan walked in, he noticed that it was not simple. In such a chaotic city, it was common for houses to be rebuilt. But the furnishings in the house had not been changed for at least hundreds of years. Impregnable. This word flashed in Feng Yuan's mind, and his eyes were full of light. No wonder Guo Fengyu was a little naive. It turned out that there was a senior guarding him. While thinking, the two had taken their seats respectively. Old Kai poured a cup of tea for Feng Yuan and coughed twice. You are a guest from afar, so I treat you with courtesy. But, it is not honorable to threaten a half-grown child. Senior, you're wrong. Feng Yuan shook his head and said, unusual times call for unusual things. I have no choice. Please forgive me. Old man Kai took a sip of tea and pondered for a moment before continuing, forget it. That child is too naive and this old man is also at fault. Why have you come to the Yinyang region? I came to entrust an orphan to you. Feng Yuan said in a low voice, I offended a force. It's not convenient to take them with me. I only beg you to take them in. If you want any reward, just mention it. I will never refuse. Fellow Daoist, your surname is Feng. The old man surnamed Kai thought for a while on his wrinkled face, but he didn't ask his name. He just said, my surname is Kai, and my first name is Ji. I can accept the two children on behalf of the Linli building. People in the Yinyang region never ask about their origins. You can rest assured. Hearing the elder's words, Feng Yuan was surprised and hesitated. Everything came too easily, so he was a little worried. The old man chuckled. You must be curious. Yes. I heard from friend Gua that the Linli building is very mysterious, but now it is so easy to accept outsiders. It's completely different from my imagination. Feng Yuan told the truth, and the old man was a little relieved. He shook his head and said, I believe in my own vision. Although my status in the Linli building is not high, it is not a problem to arrange two people. What's more, it's a special period now. We need manpower. Feng Yuan raised his eyebrows and said, special period. Yes. Old man Kai smiled and showed his yellow teeth. He suddenly looked a little treacherous. It's not a secret in the big forces in the Yinyang region. You can go with me 2 days later. Those boys and girls can also go there to see the world. Then you will know why I am so easy to talk to. Feng Yuan frowned, but he still nodded. So, I will wait for a few days. Feng Yu, come here. Freshly baked spiritual potatoes. On the ridge of the spiritual field, Su Buwang excitedly ran to Guo Fengyu with hot spiritual potatoes in his hands. Guo Fengyu rolled her eyes and snorted, you steal the spiritual potatoes from old Kai again. Be careful that he will hit you with a hoe. I am not afraid. Uncle Feng is here. Besides, there is my sister. Guo Fengyu glanced at Su Li who had peeled a spiritual potato and immediately smiled. As the saying goes, the law does not punish the masses. No matter how powerful old Kai was, he couldn't beat them together. I haven't even settled the matter of you threatening me last time. You want to bribe me? No way. Guo Fengyu had a look of disdain on her face, but her hands disobediently took the spirit potato and began to eat it while giggling. The grudges from a few days ago had long been tossed beyond the highest heavens. Ho ho, unexpectedly, the two boys get along well. Seeing the scene from a distance, old Kai smiled with some relief. I only care about protecting him, but I forget that he even has no friends of the same age. Now he has 2 more friends, which can make up for my mistake. Fong Yuan could only nod silently after hearing that. Old Kai thought that he was worried about the enemy, so he just sighed and said nothing. What? You have no parents since you were a child. Su Buwang spat out the skin of the spiritual potato in his mouth and smirked. Although I have a father, it's better than not having one. I was brought up by an old servant who sweeps the floor. Later, the old servant died. I was lonely and was despised by those people all day long. Compared to me, you still have old man Kai. Guo Fengyu stared at him and said, You are so miserable. Although old Kai looks fierce on the surface, I have nothing to say about him. Isn't that right? Su Buwang said with some disappointment. He didn't notice that the spiritual potato in Su Li's hand had become a pile of black powder. What about your Uncle Fong? Who is he? Guo Fengyu asked curiously. I think he is very good to you. He? I don't know. Su Buwang scratched his head. I met him suddenly. Maybe we hit it off. I followed him everywhere and felt much better than staying at home. Well, I still don't know your name. How old are you this year? Me, Su Buwang, 1019 years old this year. You are 1000 years old. I am only 700 years old. Nice to meet you. Ha ha ha, what are you doing? Well, I will accept you as my younger brother. The 2 young men played on the ridge of the field, without any self-awareness as practitioners. Old Kai couldn't help laughing. Younger brother, you said that I overprotected Feng Yu. I think you are almost the same. Fong Yuan's face darkened. Did this guy forget the purpose of coming here? Suddenly, he fixed his eyes and saw the black powder falling around Su Li. He was slightly confused. What was she doing? Well, younger brother, it's almost time. Go back and have a rest. It's time for us to set off. Old Kai stood up and patted the dust on his body. Then he turned around and walked back. After a while, they changed into the unique uniforms of the Linli building. Each of them had a bamboo hat in their hands. Fong Yuan touched the familiar pattern on the bamboo hat. His eyes were slightly bright. It was exactly the same as the reincarnation mirror. The manager of the Linli building was definitely an acquaintance. The bamboo hat is attached with a tactical matrix. After you put it on, you can cover your face. It was the first time for Guo Fengyu to participate in such an action. She was excited. After hearing that, she became more excited. Old Kai, this is the unique fog-concealing bamboo hat of the Linli building. You have so many. Don't talk nonsense. Put it on quickly. Old Kai became fierce again. Guo Fengyu shrank her neck and quickly put on the bamboo hat. Her face was suddenly covered by a layer of fog. They left the house and walked a few steps along the street. Suddenly, she seemed to feel something. But she didn't look back. She just transmitted the sound to Fong Yuan. Fong Yuan stopped and looked back. Suddenly, his pupils shrank. The original yard was gone. Ho ho, it seems that you also know about the tactical matrix. It may be a surprise to take you there this time. Old Kai laughed. Fong Yuan shook his head and said, I don't even know what the purpose of the action is. I can't guarantee it. You will know when you go there. Fong Yuan nodded and followed her. The 3 people behind him walked side by side. Su Li walked on the far left and looked up at the gloomy sky from time to time. Why are there no people on the streets of Juqing? Su Buwang felt strange. Guo Fengyu shook her head. It's not like this usually. I have never seen it. After walking a few more streets, Su Li looked up more often. What are you looking at, sister? Su Buwang felt a little strange. But he sensed that the mood of the two people in front of him became serious, so he couldn't ask more. Here we are. All of a sudden, old Kai stopped in the middle of the continent. Guo Fengyu and Su Buwang were stunned. What? Before they asked, the scene in front of them suddenly changed. It turned into a dark red as if the world had changed. All the houses around disappeared, as if they had entered another world. Lord Shinnong, you are finally here. A black cloud surged in the distance. When they approached, Su Buwang found that it was a group of people who also wore the costumes of the Linli building. The leading man's voice was a little strange, but it didn't prevent them from hearing it clearly. Lord Zhua and others are all here. Old Kai looked slightly serious under the bamboo hat. It seems that the situation is not good. Let's go there quickly. Okay. After that, the leading man turned around and left without doubting the people behind old Kai. Guo Fengyu curled her lips. The old man's position in the Linli building is not bad. Old bastard, you have kept it from me for so long. No wonder there are so many misty cloaks. They moved forward. It seemed that there was no direction in this world. The direction was only marked by color. The deeper they went, the closer the color of the ground was to black, and it was sticky like blood that hadn't dried up. This damn place is really uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Su Buwang was a little confused after hearing Guo Fengyu's words. Why do I feel quite comfortable? Chapter 545. Comfortable. Guo Fengyu glanced at Su Buwang strangely, and the latter immediately smiled awkwardly. Just kidding. When Guo Fengyu turned around, Su Buwang's face slightly darkened. He was not kidding. Even he knew that it was absolutely not a normal phenomenon to feel comfortable in such a strange area. Su Li's white palm brushed the air, and she raised her eyebrows slightly. It was somewhat familiar. The pneuma of the bloodstone, since we are here, I will not hide it from you. Old Kai, who was not far in front, secretly transmitted the sound to everyone. Since 1,000 years ago, the yin-yang region has been shrinking, and the reason is this place. We call this place the Bloody Circle. There are two extremes of yin and yang in the yin-yang region. Yin and yang contradict each other and maintain a balance. However, 1,000 years ago, the Bloody Circle appeared between the two without warning and broke the absolute balance, causing the yin-yang region to be squeezed and constantly shattered. There are also tactical matrix masters in the yin-yang region. They speculate that if the development of the Bloody Circle is not curbed, the yin-yang region will disappear completely in another 100 years. Whether it was the former Baichuan mansion or the current Linli building, as the pillar of the yin-yang region, they naturally have to shoulder the responsibility of destroying the Bloody Circle. Speaking of this, old Kai laughed. Of course, the overall situation will be taken care of by Lord Zhua. What we can do is to try our best to clear the endless blood tide in the Bloody Circle. I see. Feng Yuan nodded, but he only believed 70% in his heart. The man was so respectful to old Kai just now. Old Kai's status was definitely not as low as he described. It was even likely that she was one of the higher-ups of the Linli building. But why didn't he admit it? He glanced at Guo Fengyu and didn't say anything. After 2 days of contact, old Kai knew that Feng Yuan, who was forcibly pulled into the cleaning team, was silent most of the time. So, he didn't care and continued to remind, when you put on these clothes, you can only call each other by a code name. Don't expose your identity. For example, my name is Shinnong. You also think of a code name. Don't expose your identity when we meet later. Code name. Su Buwang scratched his head. His thinking was limited to Xingtian Shrine. If the name related to Xingtian Shrine was exposed, it would not be good. Guo Fengyu smiled and said proudly, eldest brother, my code name is Yufeng. I named it by myself. How is it? Is it nice? Su Buwang rolled his eyes. It sounds good. I know who you are as soon as I hear it. Guo Fengyu immediately retorted, it's impossible. No one in the Linli building knows the real identity of old Kai and me. Eldest brother, you can't generalize. I know. Su Buwang thought for a while, then I will be called Buhue. Not forgetting was named by that person. How could he not forget his mother? I don't believe it. I am willing to leave, give up the identity of Xingtian Shrine, and wander around the world to find the trace of my mother. I will never regret it. Thinking of this, Su Buwang didn't say much. Su Li was silent for a moment and said softly, call me Qing Shui. Qing Shui, when I take over Qing Shui's circle, the world will be your backyard. I will help you get back all the sufferings you have suffered. Qing Shui. Good spirit, good name. Buhue, your sister's name is much better than yours. Old man Kai laughed and turned around. Brother Fong, are you the only one left? Fong Yuan stared at Su Li and blurted out two words. Fong Cun. Fong Cun. Isn't the Yinyang region the place of Fong Cun? Old man Kai sighed with emotion. It seemed that he recalled the past, and his tone was inexplicably heavy. Then he hurried on and stopped talking. Speaking of which, Uncle Fong has never revealed his real name. Is he called Fong Cun? Su Buwang thought in his heart and became distressed again. I don't even know the surname of my new sister. Even the two characters of Qing Shui are likely to be fake. Alas, why do practitioners like to hide things these days? After the group walked across a blood-red river, they finally saw a large patch of dark clouds in the distance. The sounds of intense fighting reached their ears, but the situation was covered by the blood, so they could not see clearly. Behind the contact point, the several rows of the Black Army could be clearly distinguished. From afar, they looked like many thick black lines that were neat and uniform. Old man Kai took everyone into the last row of the Black Army and reminded everyone solemnly, we are in the third sequence. 3 hours later, we will go to the battlefield to kill monsters. Get ready. As for the boys, you just hide behind and protect yourselves. Do you understand? Yes. Guo Fengyu took the lead to agree. But if one saw his excited face through the bamboo hat, it was obvious that he was not going to obey. He knew about the bloody circle and the current situation was critical. Unfortunately, old man Kai had always been unwilling to take him here. Now that he finally got the opportunity, how could he not go in and have a look? Su Buwang seemed to be much calmer. After all, Xingtian Shrine was the top holy sect. Even if he was an invisible person who was disliked, his father was the Emperor of Evil, who had a high status and was second only to the Palace Lord. He had experienced much more than Guo Fengyu. Since the Bloody Circle is the biggest hidden danger in the Yinyang region, there are 3 forces in Ju City. Why are you the only ones here? Fong Yuan glanced at the black clothes in the distance and couldn't help but ask. Before old man Kai answered, there was a hearty voice next to him, are you a casual practitioner who has just joined the force? There is more than one bloody circle. There are many small bloody circles. Our Linli building will resist the largest one, and the rest will be handed over to the Liang Villa and the Morning Soul House. This is a clear division of labor. At this point, the burly man who spoke tilted his bamboo hat to the side and winked a little. Old man Shenong, you really like to hide. This time, the bloody circle is in a critical situation, and you actually bring a senior. Old man Kai frowned and said lightly, it's just a coincidence. How can you see that he is a senior? Ha 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 ha. The burly man pointed at the bamboo hat, although this thing can block the spiritual awareness, my eyes are not broken. This brother has a calm temperament and doesn't panic in the face of danger. At first glance, I can tell that you have seen the world. On the contrary, these turnips are all young. Are they the juniors that old man Shenong brought to see the world? Fang Yuan turned his head and saw that Su Li had hidden behind Su Buwang. She was timid and very scared. Fang Yuan couldn't help but twitch his eyebrows and feet. He couldn't help but think of her again. Could it be that beautiful women all had superb acting skills? The new generation excels the old. The cause of fighting against the bloody circle always needs to be inherited by the descendants. Old man Shenong, I really think highly of you this time. In the past, when I saw you come alone, I really thought that you were a loner who only knew how to farm. Old man Kai's eyes were full of anger. Taizhan, if I didn't know that you are a straightforward boy, I would send you down the mountain. My food supply is running out. Oh, don't. Please calm down. I have so many descendants to raise. The food supply can't be cut off. Seeing Tishan's fear, Guo Fengyu almost laughed out loud. She had seen Uncle Taizhan. He was straightforward and didn't like to cover his face. So, he had revealed his true identity early. Uncle Tishan's real name is Wang Taizhan. Guo Fengyu transmitted the sound to Su Buwang and Su Li in a low voice. Uncle Taizhan is an excellent person. He has a good wife and many children and grandchildren at home. His family style is very good. When I was wandering in the early years, I even asked for food. That family was the only one who didn't drive me away and took me in for a meal. They also wanted to adopt me, but I was stubborn at that time and didn't agree. Then I met old man Kai. Su Buwang patted Guo Fengyu's bamboo hat and said sadly, "Don't talk about your shameful past in the future. Just like me, I will never say that I was chased by people until I had nowhere to go and even disguised as a woman." Big brother, didn't you say it? While everyone was laughing and talking, Su Li didn't say a word. She spread out her divine awareness and shuttled back and forth under many black bamboo hats. The tactical matrix on the bamboo hat was of the 10th grade, which was very good. But for her, it was nothing. The battle line stretched for hundreds of miles. Su Li's divine awareness didn't stop until it reached the center of the Black Army. Finally, she saw a man with a cyan fox mask. He was tall and steady like a mountain. Su Li frowned and her divine awareness stayed above the man. The tactical matrix on the mask is more than the 12th grade. I can't see through it unless I touch it myself. At this moment, a man in a black bamboo hat came over and gave a jade slip. Lord Zhuo, Lord Xin sent a message from the front line. The man with the cyan fox mask took it. Su Li saw this scene with her divine awareness and thought. It turns out that he is Zhuo. The mask is very similar to Ling Qinglan's mask. But Ling Qinglan is still in Zhuzhou region and her soul has just recovered. So, it is definitely not him. Who is the one with the code name Xin? After thinking for a moment, the man with the cyan fox mask had crushed the jade slip in his hand. His voice was lost through the mask and was a bit weird. But it still couldn't hide the determination in his words. Since there is one more Shueji, Xin can't deal with it. Let the second and third sequences go in at the same time to force back the blood tide and open the way for me. I will go in person. As soon as the words came out, the messenger was so shocked that his bamboo hat fell to the ground. Lord, you can't do that. If you leave, there will be no commander. The morale of the army will be in chaos. When the blood tide rushes into Ju City, the people in Yinyang region will be in misery and suffering. The man with the cyan fox mask stopped and was surrounded by cyan luster. Su Li immediately recognized the familiar light. Chiyu evil skill. This man was Su Qingtan. Could it be him? Su Li's heart fluctuated for a moment, but she soon calmed down. Since she was here, it wouldn't be strange to see anyone. At this moment, the man with the cyan fox mask said again, "How is Luo, who came back a few days ago?" "Lord Luo is seriously injured and in a coma." The man with the cyan fox mask took a deep breath and thought for a moment. Then he said in a deep voice, "Send a message to all the golden stewards to gather masters to go to the depths of the bloody realm to help. There are many reclusive practitioners in Enyang region. I don't believe that they won't stand out if they know that Enyang region is about to be destroyed." Chapter 546. Hearing this, Su Li quietly withdrew her divine awareness. The Linli building was still using the old style. It was not difficult to guess that Old Man Kai, who was in charge of the granary, was probably at this level. Sure enough, after a while, the noise of the whole army suddenly quieted down. Taizhan and Old Man Kai stopped talking and looked at each other. Both of them saw the seriousness and awe in each other's eyes. Old Man Kai pinched the Linli card in his hand and looked nervous. The front line was in an emergency. They didn't even know how much burden Lord Zhua and others were shouldering. It was ridiculous that he still guarded his own territory. He even had some resentment and didn't want to have more contact with the top management of the Linli building. How childish. "Brother Fong, tell me the truth. Just how high is your cultivation?" Huashan realm. Taking a deep breath, Old Man Kai suddenly took off his bamboo hat and looked directly at Fong Yuan. Fong Yuan was stunned. Taizhan also took off his bamboo hat and looked at Old Man Kai with a complicated expression. "It's you, Old Man Kai. It turns out that you are not dead. But I have become a useless old man." Old Man Kai shook his head and still focused on Fong Yuan. "I just received a message that the front line of the blood circle is in an emergency. Lord Zhua has no way to help, so he sent a message to us and asked us to gather hidden seniors to help." Fong Yuan frowned and was silent. He hadn't figured out whether the Linli building was the real Linli building or not. He didn't even have direct contact with the blood circle. How could he make a decision? "Brother." Old Man Kai glanced at Taizhan. "I went to the front line in those years. No ordinary practitioner could survive there. When I went there, I was in the middle stage of Huashan realm. I survived, but my cultivation regressed to the Jindan realm. So far, I haven't made any progress. Now more than 700 years have passed. I can't guarantee whether the situation in the front line is better or worse than before." Taizhan was silent. The situation in those years was much more serious than now. The front line was almost filled with people's lives to barely save the Enyang region. For this reason, Old Man Kai's son and daughter-in-law both died in the battle, and his daughter-in-law and the Guo family didn't come back alive. Even if I were to go, it would be meaningless for these old bones of mine. Old Man Kai's eyes were filled with tears. "I thought that the Linli building would grow stronger in these years, and I could comfort my son and daughter-in-law's family." "Kai!" Tai Shan suddenly said. His white teeth were very dazzling in the blood. "I missed it last time, but I can't hide this time." Old Man Kai trembled as he looked at Iron Mountain. His lips trembled, but he didn't know what to say. 9 out of 10 people would die on this trip, but could he stop it? With a sigh, Mr. Kai turned to look at Fong Yuan and said, "Brother, I won't force you. Everyone has the right to choose in the face of life and death. What's more, you just came to the Enyang region, so you don't need to risk your life. If you're not strong enough, I'll just pretend that nothing happened." Fong Yuan's eyebrows suddenly relaxed. He figured it out. Now was different from the past. Instead of continuing to explore carefully, it was better to take the initiative to attack. My cultivation is higher than you can imagine. In fact, it's much higher. I can help you, but I have a condition. Fong Yuan took off his bamboo hat, and the pressure of nature's test covered the two people who were horrified. He said calmly, I want to see your senior. Crossing Calamity Stage. The Azure Fox-masked man was a little surprised when he received the news. With such cultivation, where can't he go in the world? Why does he need to hide in the Yinyang region? Thinking of this, the Azure Fox-masked man was a little excited. If he is willing to help, the pressure on the front line will be greatly reduced. Yes. Lead the way. I'll see him in person. A moment later, the Azure Fox-masked man arrived. A large area had been isolated around Fong Yuan, and a big tactical matrix was set up around it. Even Old Man Kai and Iron Mountain were excluded. Uncle Fong has such a powerful background. Big brother, don't tell me you're also some big shot. Guo Fengyu stared at Su Buwang and was full of surprise. No, I'm not. Su Buwang waved his hand impatiently. Did Uncle Fong take the wrong medicine? Why did he suddenly expose himself and meet with the senior? What should he do if he was in danger? By the way, Sister Qingshui. Su Buwang thought of Su Li, but saw her serious face. He immediately thought of something and didn't disturb her. In the big tactical matrix. Fong Yuan looked at the Azure Fox-masked man calmly and said slowly, since it's urgent, I'll make it short. Who are you? The Azure Fox-masked man trembled slightly, but he couldn't stop laughing. Although Brother Fong has experienced many vicissitudes, I recognize you at a glance. He pulled off the mask without hesitation and revealed a face that was also much more mature. Do you remember me, brother? I'm Su Qinghao. It's great to see you at this time. Fourth brother. Su Li was stunned. The silly boy in those days was now Lord Zhua, who could take charge independently. Fong Yuan looked relaxed. It turns out to be you. So, was the Linli building established by your brother? Su Qinghao shook his head. I don't know. My brother and I joined it later. It took us some time to deal with the affairs of the sect. Oh. Fong Yuan recalled Su Qinghao's identity. You and Su Qingtan belong to the Xingbei sect. It must have taken you a lot of effort to get out. Yes. Su Qinghao remembered the time when Brother Duan took him to be chased. He sighed with emotion. Brother Fong, when we were being chased, we often heard your name and even thought that you had been here for a long time. You are the only grand holy son from the 4 major sacred sects to leave. This is also the reason why I didn't suspect you to be a spy from Glory's sect the moment I saw you. Run away. That's what the outside world says. Fong Yuan smiled bitterly. The treasure of Tianhe was still in his body. In addition, the sect had always treated the matter of the reincarnation state gently, so he couldn't feel bad. How could he let go of the Tianhe sect? Big brother Fong, there's no time to lose. Let's hurry to the front line. Big brother and the others couldn't hold on any longer. They're all heavily injured and struggling to resist. Fong Yuan made up his mind. Let's go. Since it is the real Linli building, I will try my best as a former protector. Lord Shino, Lord Iron Mountain. Lord Fong Cun has gone to the front lines. The crisis is temporarily averted. Lord Iron Mountain's application to go to the front lines has been rejected by Lord Zhua. Please return to the 3rd sequence and continue to wait to clear out the blood tide. After the messenger left, Old Kai and Iron Mountain breathed a sigh of relief. Then, smiles appeared on their faces. You've done a great service this time, Old Man Kai. You brought such a powerful expert with you, and you even got Magistrate Zhua to lift the alarm. I didn't expect it either. Old Kai sighed with emotion. Thinking that he pretended to be profound to threaten Fang Yuan a few days ago, he couldn't help but feel a little sad. Why didn't my son and others encounter such a good thing in those days? Uncle Fang, Su Buwang murmured and was a little worried. Su Li stood aside, and her eyes flickered slightly. According to the description of the fourth brother, the Linli building was really built by an old friend, and many old subordinates of the Linli building were won over. If her identity was revealed, she would take over this force instantly. But it may also be a trap. Su Li thought deeply. As time went by, the third sequence had come to the front. Suddenly, a bloody smell came. With the hot airwaves, a large number of exhausted practitioners with blood stains began to return from the blood fog. Third sequence, out. As the head of the guarding big tactical matrix shouted, all practitioners stepped into the blood fog without hesitation. After the smoke passed, dense bloody insects came into view. These insects were of different sizes. The small ones were as small as ants, and the big ones were as high as a mountain. Their shells were full of barbs, which were extremely ferocious. Guo Fengyu gasped, "What kind of monsters are these?" Su Buwang looked a little confused and didn't respond. Tai Shan took out 2 huge hammers and said, "Old Kai, I didn't bring my juniors this time. I'll go first." After that, he rushed in and started killing without waiting for Old Kai to say anything. Old Kai shook his head and turned back to tell Su Li carefully, "These insects are transformed from blood. The only weakness is the black mark on the top of their heads. After breaking it, it can be turned into blood and integrated into the ground. But it will be reborn soon. What we have to do is to prevent their number from increasing sharply and kill as many as possible. You 3 can choose some small ones to kill, but remember not to be too far away from me." "Buwang, boy, where are you going?" Before Old Kai finished his words, he suddenly found that Su Buwang had walked to the front of the insect tide. He couldn't help but be shocked, but it was too late to stop him. Su Buwang's eyes were dull, as if he didn't hear Old Kai's words at all, and continued to walk forward. However, the next scene made Old Kai even more shocked. Clatter, all the bloody insects, no matter big or small, made away and crawled on the ground, as if they were greeting their most noble king. They would rather be killed than move. What's going on? Everyone around was stunned and didn't know what was going on. Before Old Kai finished his shock, a black light flashed in front of him and followed Su Buwang. "Is that the little girl?" Old Man Kai watched in a daze as she passed through the swarm of worms. The worms were as fragile as paper in front of her, and they were blown away by the wind. "Grandpa Kai," Guo Fengyu came to his senses and said reluctantly, "I didn't dare to tell you." Among the 3 people before, it was not Uncle Fang, but the elder sister. Old Kai's eyes widened. "How could you hide such an important thing from me?" Swish! Su Li stopped beside Su Buwang and waved her hand in front of his eyes. No response. "Is your mind taken away by something?" Su Li pinched the crawling bloody insects around her and thought for a long time. She relaxed her eyebrows and stared at Su Buwang's side face gently. She smiled sweetly, "No matter what it is, I will accompany you this time. I won't let you be in danger." Unfortunately, Su Buwang couldn't hear it. Blood covered the sky. The hill-sized bloody insects behind Fang Yuan fell to the ground and turned into a puddle. There was no blood on his black clothes. When he looked up, he saw the dark sky. They should be here. Boom! A line of blood brushed past him and blasted into the ground. Not long after, a ragged man walked out of the blood mist again with a cold expression. When he saw Fang Yuan, there was a fluctuation in his eyes. "It's you." Fang Yuan was stunned when he saw the familiar face, and then he smiled, "Long time no see." Chapter 547. You're getting older. Ling Mo curled his lips slightly, and his cold eyes flashed. A white knife light was drawn out from the bloody mist and fell into his hand. He became sharp like a knife. You've grown old, but your temperament hasn't changed at all. Fong Yuan showed a rare smile. He didn't make any movement, but a gorgeous river emerged behind him, which even squeezed the bloody mist to fade a lot. Those who are seriously injured should rest at home. Leave the rest to me. Fong Yuan turned around, and the river above instantly enlarged. It rolled back like a huge wave and filled the sky. Ling Mo took a deep breath, and a trace of tiredness flashed in his eyes. But he didn't take a rest as he was told. Instead, he said, "Be careful, there are two of them." Boom. Before Ling Mo could finish his words, there were two huge and ferocious bloody bird heads squeezed into the middle of the river and screamed at Ling Mo. Ling Mo looked slightly serious. He changed the gesture in his hands and shouted, "Break." The watercolored river instantly froze for thousands of miles, turning into a glacier that was 1,000 feet tall. The white cold air condensed into a stream that rushed into the ears of the blood-colored bird's head, then turned into an icicle that pierced out. Poochie. Dark red blood flowed into the river and dyed a small area red. The bloody mist quieted down, but Fong Yuan still looked cold and did not relax his vigilance. He didn't believe that the monster that could make the Linli building helpless was so weak. Cough. Their vital point is not their head. Ling Mo walked over with a knife and stared at the quiet glacier. Suddenly, his eyes were fixed. He's here. Boom. The huge force fiercely struck the glacier, shattering it in the blink of an eye. The violent shockwaves set off a gale that instantly engulfed the two of them. What's that sound? There was a loud noise just now, did you hear it? The deafening sound spread far into the distance. With the exception of the cultivators who were fighting in the blood tide, all the other cultivators heard it and could not help but look towards the source of the sound. Su Qinghao stood in the center of the army and didn't move at all. It seemed that everything was under his control. But under the mask of the cyan fox, he was extremely worried. Brother Fong, Brother Ling. In the blood tide, Su Buwang walked forward blankly, unaware of the changes in the outside world. Beside him, Su Li looked up at the front not far away, and her eyes flickered. What a strong fluctuation. It's at the late stage of the tribulation passing stage, and there's more than one of them. If it was 6 years ago, I wouldn't have been a match for him if I didn't use my trump card. With Fong Yuan's cultivation, it is not a problem to hold on for a while. Su Li thought, and her figure always followed Su Buwang. About the change of Unforgettable, she had already thought of some speculation. Back then, she gave birth to Unforgettable in the reincarnation mirror. Although it was a decision made in a hurry, the firm memory was extremely clear, and the process was as vivid as yesterday. I killed Lin Yanqing and got something. Could it be? A trace of hesitation flashed in Su Li's eyes. She was not sure whether this opportunity was good or bad for Unforgettable. After hesitating for a long time, she did not stop Su Buwang and continued to let him move forward. In the center of the explosion, a large number of ice cubes floated in the air and condensed into a huge ice ball, protecting Fong Yuan and Su Li. That power. Fong Yuan's eyes were dignified. He breathed out, and his slightly pale face slowly became ruddy. You can hold on until now. Ling Mo seemed to be unable to hold on and sat on the ground. When he heard this, he was silent for a moment and said, "The Linli building has been destroyed once. It must not be destroyed for the second time. Speaking of it, you belonged to the Yinma cult in the past. Why do you call yourself a member of the Linli building now?" Ling Mo snorted and turned his head. Seeing this, Fong Yuan said no more. It always felt good to meet old friends. The past had become smoke, and there was no need to make the relationship too stiff. Clatter, the glacier melted into water and turned into a river again, hanging over Fong Yuan's head. Boom! Boom! The dull footsteps shook away the surrounding bloody mist. The wounds on the heads of the two bloody strange birds had disappeared, and their bodies, which were nearly 100 meters long, appeared in front of people. The giant birds are not living creatures, but transformed from blood. Ling Imo stared at the giant birds that were still ready to move. Do you see the small cyan mark under its body? If we can break through it, the birds will die instantly. Fong Yuan nodded, squinted his eyes, and suddenly smiled. It's so simple. Ling Imo was stunned and frowned. Does the Tianhe sect have any special long-range attack means? No. Fong Yuan smiled indifferently. The Tianhe sect doesn't, but the Linli building does. Ling Mo's pupils shrank suddenly. A dazzling and bright sword light suddenly flashed out. It was so fast that even Ling Imo could only see a residual shadow. AO sword skills. Su Li stopped and saw the two people not far away in the divine awareness. She couldn't help but smile slightly. AO sword skills. Fong Yuan, you have found your own way on the sword after all. However, such an attack can't take away the two behemoths. So, let me help you. Her eyes suddenly brightened as if it was daytime. The fierce and destructive sword intent instantly passed through the nothingness and merged into the white light. The next moment, the two cyan marks were torn like paper. Boom! The giant birds fell down and stirred up the smoke. Not far away, there were two men like wooden stakes. So easy. Fong Yuan frowned and began to doubt the strength of the Linli building now. Fong Yuan is so strong. Ling Imo was slightly stunned and felt a little bitter. It's really the top holy sect. At the same time. Plop. Su Buang suddenly stopped. He rolled his eyes and fell flat on his face. Su Li gently picked him up and touched the wounds on his face. In a moment, all the wounds disappeared and he recovered. It's related to the two strange birds. I killed them, so Su Buang can't find the direction. If I knew it. Su Li's frown suddenly disappeared. Well, don't worry. In the peripheral area, with the death of the strange birds, the blood tide slowly retreated into the depths of the blood mist. Many practitioners who saw this change were stunned at first, and then they were all happy. It retreated. It must be the Lord who went deep into the blood mist killed the key monsters. The blood tide can't affect here. Yes. It's estimated that it will return to its original state after a while. Finally, we can rest for 2 days. Su Qinghao breathed a sigh of relief, and then he was worried again. It's so fast. Did the eldest brother pay any price? Fortunately, as soon as this thought appeared, he saw two figures with intact hands and feet slowly walking out of the blood mist. Welcome back, Lord Zui and Lord Fong Cun. Someone shouted. The crowd of cultivators fell silent for a moment before they all followed suit and shouted. Welcome back, Lord Zui and Lord Fong Cun. Welcome back. Fangling Yuan raised his eyebrows slightly and whispered, Sin. Ling Imo, what crime did you commit? Ling Mo's expression was slightly gloomy. He shook his head without explaining and turned away. Su Qinghao was not surprised and walked to Fong Yuan. Eldest brother Fong, you must be tired. Come with me to the territory of the Linli building to have a rest. I didn't come alone. Ling Imo turned his head and saw Elder Kai and his grandson in the crowd. His face suddenly changed and he had a bad feeling. In Jueching, there were more than 200 restaurants opened by the Linli building. Each one was exactly the same as the layout in the reincarnation mirror. At this moment, on the top floor of one of the restaurants. What? They rushed into the blood tide. Fong Yuan heard what Elder Kai said and immediately walked out, but he was stopped by Su Qinghao, eldest brother. Calm down. Who are they? What kind of appearance? You just came to Jueqing and are not familiar with the people and the place. Let me find them. Fong Yuan took a deep breath and looked at Elder Kai, who was ashamed. He said word by word, Su Buwang. What? Su Qinghao's face changed dramatically in an instant. He took out a white jade token and said solemnly, immediately. Dispatch all the men of sacrifice to go to the blood circle to find. Speaking of this, Su Qinghao looked up at Fong Yuan, eldest brother Fong. Do you have anything with Su Buwang's pneuma and appearance? They are all here. Fong Yuan handed out a storage ring. These are the things he usually used for practice. Then he walked to the desk and described Su Buwang's appearance with a few strokes. It looks like my sister. Su Qinghao's eyes were a little sore. He picked up the paper and went out immediately. Elder Kai stood by the door, trembling with fear. He was more awed by the identity of Fong Yuan and his fellows. Lord Zhua, who was in charge of all the daily affairs of the Linli building, called Fong Cun eldest brother. He was just one of the middle-level members of the Linli building. He called Fong Cun younger brother Fong before. Wasn't he overstepping his authority? Guo Fengyu was absent-minded, and her eyes were shining. Su Buwang, Lord Zhua's eyes almost popped out when he heard the name. Eldest brother Su, you are really extraordinary. At this moment, Su Buwang stood on the brightly lit street, looked up at the always dark sky, and saw the lively crowd around him. He was confused. Am I not killing monsters in the blood circle? Where is this? Su Buwang sighed and pinched his nose. Why does it hurt a little? It seems that I have been beaten. Uncle Fong is gone, and Sister Qingshui is also gone. What is going on? Su Buwang had a toothache. He went to a tea stall on the street and sat down. He shouted, "Waiter, give me a pot of tea." Okay, please wait a moment. The clever-looking waiter immediately came over with a pot of tea. He was stunned when he saw Su Buwang's appearance. Then he suddenly remembered something. His eyes widened, and the kettle in his hand fell to the ground. He tremblingly took out a piece of paper from his arms. Su Buwang saw that something was wrong. He glanced at the person on the paper. Wasn't that himself? It's you. The waiter shouted excitedly, which scared Su Buwang and made him run away immediately. Don't run away. The waiter immediately panicked and chased after Su Buwang. Su Buwang immediately ran faster, but his mind was confused. He recalled with a look of horror, could it be that when I lost my memory, I did something heinous and unforgivable? Then I was wanted by the whole city. Oh my God! What the hell is going on? Chapter 548. Su Buwang's cultivation in Jindan realm was still not good enough. After escaping from 2 workshops, he found that he was surrounded by a group of people in bamboo hats who dressed the same as him. I say, seniors. Su Buwang cupped his fists cautiously. Why do you chase me? I think. One of the men in black took out the drawing and compared it several times. Then he said to the leader, it's him. Take him back. Lord Zhua ordered us not to hurt him. The leading man in bamboo hat nodded and said loudly, little fellow practitioner, don't panic. We are equal to the Linli building and will not hurt you. Lord Zhua invites you to come over for a chat. Su Buwang looked a little relaxed, but he was still a little vigilant. Lord Zhua. I have heard of this name, but I have no relationship with him. Why does he invite me? The leader couldn't help laughing. Then we don't know. The Linli building will not kill innocent people, and the location is in a crowded restaurant nearby. You can rest assured. Su Buwang glanced at the dark surroundings and shrugged, looking at the situation. I have to go. After a while, Su Buwang came to the front of the Linli restaurant. It seems that it is the property of the Linli building. I really believe in you. If I go in, you will have the final say in everything you do. Su Buwang looked up and saw the plaque. When he was about to turn around and leave, the surrounding people in bamboo hats couldn't stop him. When he was in a dilemma, suddenly a familiar voice came into his ears. Buwang. Su Buwang suddenly turned back and saw the slovenly face. His eyes suddenly brightened. Uncle Fong. Lord Fong Cun. The surrounding people in bamboo hats in black immediately saluted together. Su Buwang was stunned and couldn't help but transmit the sound. Uncle Fong, have you entered the enemy's territory so soon? Fong Yuan was suddenly speechless. You go upstairs with me first. Su Buwang scratched his head, responded and followed. On the top floor, Su Qinghao was restless. Suddenly he heard footsteps. He looked up and saw Su Buwang's face. His heart suddenly stopped. It's true, the evil emperor is soft-hearted after all. Su Qinghao's eyes were slightly wet. My sister's flesh and blood is still in this world. That's great. Uncle Fong, look, the way this person looks at me is so strange. After being stared at for a long time, Su Buwang felt uncomfortable and couldn't help but transmit the sound. Qinghao. Fong Yuan called, and Su Qinghao immediately came to his senses. He recovered as usual, stood up and smiled. You are Su Buwang, right? When you disappeared just now, it really made your Uncle Fong anxious. So it's Uncle Fong who's looking for me. Su Buwang suddenly understood and scratched his head. I don't know what happened. It seems that I lost a piece of memory. When I woke up again, I was already standing on the street. I don't know what happened before. There's such a thing. Fong Yuan frowned. He had learned about the situation in the blood tide from old Kai. Little friend Buwang, how did you form a connection with the blood realm? Su Qinghao sat down. I heard from Elder Kai that you lost consciousness in the blood tide and rushed directly into it. What? Su Buwang was stunned and immediately touched his whole body. Then how could I be unscathed? That's the strange thing. When the blood tide saw you, it actually gave way and even knelt down to worship you. They were unwilling to hurt you. Su Qinghao said in confusion. Suddenly, he remembered something and said, by the way, there was a woman who chased you at that time. Why didn't I see her today? You mean Qing Shui? My sister went in with me. Su Buwang widened his eyes and stood up. His voice became anxious. Why didn't I know? I didn't see her after I came out. Is Sister Qing Shui still in the blood tide? She won't. I don't forget. Fong Yuan interrupted Su Buwang's imagination. His steady tone was inexplicably calm. With Miss Qingshui's cultivation, she can come and go freely in the blood tide. You don't have to worry about her. But she is after all, we just met Qingshui by chance. Did she chase you for you or for something else? Fong Yuan's tone sank slightly. It's hard to say. Uncle Fong, you actually suspect Sister Qingshui? Su Buwang raised his eyebrows. If she hadn't helped us, we might have died in the Jianyang desert. How can you think so? Fong Yuan was silent. People were always complicated. With the cultivation of the woman, she might be soft-hearted and did it casually to save them. No one could tell the real purpose of her coming to Ju City. Brother Fong, the Qing Shui you mentioned, Su Qinghao was confused. It seemed that Elder Kai omitted a lot of details from him in order not to be punished. A mysterious female practitioner. Fong Yuan paused and said, her cultivation is still higher than mine. Her mind is unpredictable. She may still be in Jew City. I don't know the purpose of her coming here. But I once heard that she came here to join the Leanly building. Now you show up, but she hides. It seems that what she said is false. Qingshui. Qingshui Circle. This name is really casual. Su Qinghao murmured, since she has disappeared and there are few clues, it's no use to think too much. I will let the spies pay attention. The most urgent thing is the bloody circle. Fang Yuan nodded and thought for a moment. He asked, how many monsters like the strange bird are there? How can we eliminate the influence of the bloody circle? It can't be done in a day. Su Qinghao shook his head and sighed. He glanced at Su Buwang. Brother, come with me to meet your old friend. I haven't seen you for 1,000 years. Okay. Fang Yuan got up and said to Su Buwang, who was still at a loss, you can wander around in the Leanly building. There will be no danger. I'll be back soon. Uncle Fang, don't worry. I'm smart. Su Buwang smiled and thought to himself. This Shua called Uncle Fang eldest brother. Tut, the Leanly building is really powerful. No wonder Uncle Fang had to come to find me when he heard it. If you hide here, you don't have to be afraid of being killed by Xingtian Shrine. But how to find my mother? Let's not talk about Su Buwang's distress first. After Fang Yuan and Su Qinghao ran for a while, they came to the base camp of the Leanly building. A branch of the Leanly building opened in a remote alley and looked old. No one can imagine that the headquarters of the Leanly building, which can't be found everywhere, is a shop. Su Qinghao said and walked into the shop. Fang Yuan paused at the door. He turned his head and saw a closed wine shop next to the shop. He was in a trance and even felt that he went back to the past for a moment. Zhouyue Tavern. Brother Fang. Brother Fang. A group of people suddenly rushed out of the shop and called Fang Yuan with excitement and surprise on their faces. Fang Yuan came to his sense and looked at the first face in the crowd. He smiled and said, Haydn, everyone, long time no see. Haydn's face was a little red with excitement. Brother Fang, I knew that you would come here. Let's rebuild the Leanly building together. Okay. Fang Yuan responded. He looked up and saw that Ling Mo was drinking at the table. Ling Mo was drinking at the table. He walked over and sat down. Haydn immediately handed him a glass. Why are you drinking alone? Fang Yuan picked up the flagon on the table. Ling Mo glanced up and said casually, the others are still lying down. If you don't come, no one will accompany you. Fang Yuan laughed and then stopped smiling. He took out a palm-sized jade bottle with river patterns and put it on the table. Take me to see them. You have a whole bottle of the healing panacea of the Tianhe sect. Ling Mo picked it up and looked at Fang Yuan deeply. He picked up the flagon with the other hand and went upstairs. Follow me. They passed through the back hall and entered the rockery secret passage. After passing several defense checkpoints, they came to a spacious quiet room. Just standing in front of the door, they could smell the fragrance of medicine lingering in the room for a long time. This is a quiet room especially for healing. Ling Mo gave a brief introduction and opened the stone door. Rows of familiar figures who were meditating and healing came into view. Su Qingtan, the former guards of the Yunwei, and some former subordinates of the Yinma cult. Fang Yuan was shocked. Su Qingtan heard the noise and opened his eyes first. He thought it was Ling Mo and Su Qinghao. But when he saw Fang Yuan's figure, he immediately realized that something was wrong. You are, Su Qingtan's face changed. He couldn't help laughing and coughed, ahem, the young lord of the Tianhe sect should condescend to be here. Don't talk nonsense. take the healing panacea first. Fong Yuan frowned. Ling Emo handed out the pills and distributed them. Yun Yi was also alarmed and woke up. When he saw Fong Yuan, he was shocked at first and then smiled. He put the pills into his mouth and asked, "I heard that you left the Tianhe sect and have been looking for a way to resurrect the master these years. Have you found anything? If I have, I will not come here alone." Fong Yuan shook his head and sat aside. "But have you ever thought of a way after rebuilding the Linli building in these years? It's not so easy." Su Qingtan shook his head and sighed. "It is very difficult to maintain the existence of the Yinyang domain. Now your joining is a timely help and temporarily solves the crisis. The Yinyang domain can't be destroyed. Otherwise, we will be exposed to the deduction skill. Either the Fate Ancestor or the Huangxing Hall can easily find us." Yunyi took a deep breath. "We have been holding on for thousands of years. We can't die like this." Fong Yuan glanced at others. Although they all had unusual backgrounds, they had the same firmness on their faces at the moment. They clearly knew all the truth, but they still didn't want to wake up from the dream in the reincarnation mirror. They even didn't hesitate to fight against the sect and bear the infamy of betraying the sect. Was it worth it? The cold lines on Fong Yuan's face softened a little. "Tell me, what is the situation of the blood circle?" "I don't know, but, after a long time of contact, we speculate." Ling Mo's eyes flashed. "If we want to destroy it, we must go deep into the center of the blood circle. There must be something that can continuously produce blood monsters. The strange bird you killed today was bred. Even if you destroy the strange bird, those monsters will reappear in a few days. But the deeper we go into the blood circle, the more blood monsters there are." The efficacy of the medicine in Yunyi's body began to work, and his face was a little ruddy. But when he thought of the battle that day, his tone was still gloomy. "There are more than 20 blood monsters as high as 300 meters, and some are as high as 500 meters or even thousands of meters. They are frightening from a distance. With our cultivation, we can't win." Fong Yuan glanced at a group of wounded people in the room, and his tone was as calm as a mountain. "You heal as soon as possible. I will find a way." Chapter 549. In the blink of an eye, it was night. Ling Mo held the flagon and rested his head on the tiles. No one knew what he was thinking. Suddenly, a black shadow floated to his side and sat down. It was Fong Yuan. "There is no moon at night in the Yinyang region. What are you doing on the roof?" Ling Mo didn't look at Fong Yuan, but just looked at the dark sky. "Have you figured out the method?" "It's not so fast." Fong Yuan narrowed his eyes. "You and I are not talkative. I just want to ask you one question, and then I can make a decision." "I know what you want to ask." Ling Mo said casually. "I don't know. In Qingshui's circle, I used to be the seat of the Shura sect, and I only knew how to kill people. In the reincarnation mirror, I knew the rich emotions of the human world and what comrades are. Only then did I know that people also have flesh and blood, and life is not the most important thing." Fong Yuan chuckled. "Comrades. Who do you think is a comrade?" "All the boys of the Yinma cult." Ling Mo sat up and glanced at Fong Yuan. A light flashed in his eyes. "Except the Emperor of Evil who killed his own son." Fong Yuan was silent for a moment and said, "Su Buwang is still alive." "What?" Ling Mo's face changed. "It's impossible. I clearly saw it with my own eyes. Buwang has been following me all these years. Now he is in Ju City, in the Linli building." Speaking of Su Buwang, Fong Yuan's face became gentle. "He looks like Su Li, not like his father at all. But I don't know who he is like. He is very lively. Is he here?" Ling Mo couldn't sit still. I really want to see him. So, Ling Li cheated the world at that time. But why did he discredit himself like that? The origin of the people of Xingtian Shrine is complicated. No one can explain it clearly. Bu Wang stayed in Xingtian Shrine for 900 years, and he only hated Ling Li without love. It can be seen what kind of life he had. Fang Yuan said casually and turned to the topic. I heard from Su Qingtan that you were the first to come here. How was the Linli building established? Can you tell me? Ling Mo closed his eyes. When his breath calmed down, he opened his eyes again and whispered, there is nothing to hide from you. I don't know the identity of that person, but he claimed to be the sworn enemy of the Fate Ancestor. He wanted to take revenge through the Linli building. The biggest enemy of Suli was the Fate Ancestor, so I promised to cooperate with him. Later, I don't know how he persuaded the head of the Baichuan mansion. The Linli building directly inherited the foundation of the Baichuan mansion, and then it developed. At this point, he paused. Do you see the Zhouyue winery next door? Of course. Fang Yuan nodded, very familiar. Xian Jingzhou and Su Yu also joined the Linli building. In Jiuli region, they used Xian Jingzhou's Jiguang sect as a cover to inquire for the Linli building. Although Su Yu lost the memory of reincarnation mirror, she met Xian Jingzhou and gave birth to a son with him. It can be said that this is fate. So, Su Li's regret is gone. I don't know where she is. Ling Mo took a deep breath and changed his words. At that time, no one witnessed Su Li's death with their own eyes. This is also the reason why you and we haven't given up these years. Fang Yuan nodded, and his eyes were full of firmness. One day, she will appear. She will appear downstairs in front of the gate of the Linli building and tell us, I'm back. Su Li covered her face with a veil and whispered to herself. She stood quietly in front of the slightly dilapidated gate. In front of the dilapidated door, a strange light flashed in his eyes, but he did not take another step forward. Constantly making blood monsters. According to Ling Mo's injury, it will take him a few days to heal. In this way, I still have time to go to the Yin region and find some food for Su Bai. Su Li's figure disappeared like smoke. Haydn walked to the door and looked around, but he didn't see anyone. He couldn't help but scratch his head. It's strange. Why do I have a feeling of being peeped at for no reason? A few days later, in the Linli building, Su Qingtan got up and stretched his body. The bones all over his body crackled. After so many days of injury, I finally recover. Thanks to the elixirs brought by Fang Yuan. Yuni wiped the flying sword in his hand. In this way, I have a better chance of winning if I go to destroy the blood circle. Ling Mo looked at everyone who was eager for a fight. He glanced at Fang Yuan, who had been silent, and transmitted the sound, haven't you told Buwang the truth? Fang Yuan glanced at Ling Mo's face expressionlessly and said in a muffled voice, I can't say it. It must be a hard battle to go to the blood circle this time. If I don't say it now. Ling Mo wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Fang Yuan understood what he meant. His eyes darkened and he turned to go out. I hit something in his cosmos ring, Li Yao said. What? You won't take me to the blood circle this time. Su Buwang, who was still eating delicious pastries in the room, suddenly rushed out and grabbed Fang Yuan who was about to leave. He said solemnly, Uncle Fang, didn't you say that I was too inexperienced before? How can I become stronger if you don't let me participate in such a big event? This time is different from the past. Su Qinghao was interrupted by Su Buwang. It's better to be different from the past. The more tragic it is, the more people can be trained. Uncle Fang, how can a practitioner not experience life and death? I'm afraid that you will make trouble. Fang Yuan turned around and looked stern. you can't even control the part where you lost your memory. If you lose your memory and rush into the blood tide this time, we will definitely be distracted. Su Buwang's voice was stuck in his throat. He recalled what Su Li said in the Yangtze Desert, if it weren't for you, your Uncle Fong would not be poisoned by the ghost, I see. Su Buwang suddenly let go of his hand and sat down in the room. He said firmly, I'm here and won't go anywhere. I will never make trouble for you. Uncle Fong, you must come back safely. Fong Yuan was stunned. He wondered if his words were too harsh. When did Wang Yifeng become so obedient? Of course, we will come back. You wait and don't run around. Su Qinghao said with a smile and patted Uncle Fong's shoulder, the child is sensible. Elder brother, you should be happy. It's late. If you don't go there, there will be trouble. Fong Yuan took a deep look at Su Buwang and turned away. Today, I will destroy the bloody circle. Su Buwang waited in the room from early morning to noon, and from noon to night, but still no one came back. Uncle Fong. He leaned over the table and played with the teacup in his hand, but his mind was elsewhere. If I can have the same cultivation as Uncle Fong, I can help. Unfortunately, in Xingtian Shrine, I didn't practice any cultivation methods of Xingtian Shrine. They were all rough and scattered. After coming to the outside world, I realized the preciousness of the cultivation methods. If I had known it earlier, I would have stolen it. Thinking of this, Su Buwang sighed, well, it's fate. Uncle Fong is not young. He must have had many adventures with such profound cultivation. I can't envy him. As he spoke, Su Buwang's eyes gradually became dull, and finally completely turned into nothingness. He suddenly stood up and went out, ignoring the muddle-headed guards on both sides of the door. Ha! The mark I attached to Wang is a little blurred. Is he controlled again? In the Yin realm, Su Li grabbed the ghosts in her hand and put them into Zhanglei's cave. She raised her eyebrows slightly, and her slender palm was as sharp as a knife. She waved it at the nothingness. In an instant, a gate of the isolated city appeared, and Su Li immediately flashed and disappeared. In the bloody circle, the bloody mist was hazy. Fong Yuan and others walked slowly in a group. Ling Imo held a talisman in his hand and frowned, we have gone deep into the bloody circle. Why can't we see a monster? Strange, is there something unusual happening in the bloody circle? Yun Yi was vigilant and doubtful. Something out of the ordinary. Fong Yuan's face was slightly stagnant, and then he thought of something. He suddenly became gloomy and said, it's Su Buwang. Speed up. Before he finished speaking, Fong Yuan had taken a step and left everyone far away. Ling Mo's face changed slightly, and he caught up without saying a word. Yun Yi and others also followed closely. In the nothingness, Su Buwang only felt that he was walking in a haze, and the light and shadow around him were continuous. He didn't know how long it had been, and finally a picture appeared in the darkness. It was a completely unrelated world called the Dahan Dynasty. There was no so-called cultivation circle, only ordinary mortals. Perhaps there were some magic skills and martial arts, but they were legends and couldn't be seen. Among them, there was a place called the Desu town. There was a daughter of the Su family in the town named Su Li, who was not favored since childhood. After that, various forces emerged one after another. The famous Yinma cult, the Linli building founded by Su Li, and the dispute between Ling Li, the hierarch of the Yinma cult, were all in front of him. At first, he was confused, but when he heard the name Ling Li and the name Linli building, he gradually understood that the scene in front of him must be related to his mother. And the key figure in this world, that woman, Su Li, also had the surname Su. Su Buwang forgot everything, and his body and mind were silent in the memory. The picture in front of him finally appeared, the image of that year. Su Li was cheated to death. Because of Su Yu, her relationship with Ling Li fell to the freezing point. Later, she knew the whole truth. After that, every choice she made was stained with blood, until she died and disappeared. Then, Ling Li and Fang Yuan were angry and joined hands to kill 100,000 talents in Qingshui's circle, which was the bloody accident of Holy Spirit. It turns out that the protagonist of the bloody accident of Holy Spirit is my mother. It's a pity that I can't go to my mother's hometown to have a look after passing through Zhuzhou region. Su Buwang's tears slipped down unconsciously, and he murmured softly, "It turns out that my mother gave up herself to give birth to me. Otherwise, I would be a walking corpse without a soul. It turns out that everyone lied to her. Everyone is an enemy, all enemies. Uncle Fang. Fang Yuan, you lied to me so hard. The evil emperor lied to me, and you also lied to me. Ha 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 ha." Su Buwang chuckled for a moment, and then he laughed loudly. His laughter shook the surrounding blood tide, as if the waves of the blood sea surged into the sky. He suddenly raised his head, and his eyes were blood red. "I want revenge." Chapter 550. Yes, Buwang, you have to take revenge. As the blood sea rose and fell, a soft voice came into his ears. It was sad and solemn, like crying, "I'm so unwilling to die. You have to kill all the people in the world and let them be my companions." Su Buwang slowly got up with dull eyes. The blood around him couldn't get close to him, and all turned into skeletons and ghost faces swaying around. "Go, kill people, and comfort my soul in heaven with blood." Su Buwang stretched out his hand and grasped in the air. The bloody light quickly condensed into a knife light in his hand. If there were others present, they would find that there was a round bloody light shining on his chest. He, ha 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 ha, he laughed in a low voice, and his voice gradually became louder and louder. Finally, his wild laughter spread far away. "Kill. Kill. Kill. Kill all the people in the world." In the blood mist, Fang Yuan stabbed the dead point of the strange bird with a sword. He was panting and puzzled. Why is this blood monster more difficult to kill than that day? Difficult to kill. Ling Mo's eyes flashed, and he also had doubts in his eyes. The strength of the blood monster has not increased, and it is no different from the one you and I killed that day. Why do you say so? What? Fang Yuan was stunned, and astonishment appeared in his eyes. At this moment, a roar full of killing intent sounded in the nothingness in the distance. "Kill. Kill. Kill. Kill all the people in the world." Even if the tone was hoarse, Fang Yuan still recognized it at once. He immediately ignored the doubts in his heart and trembled all over. It's the voice of Buwang. "Go. Go." Su Qingtan looked at the 4 or 5 blood monsters still blocking in front of him, and then took a deep look at the direction of the voice. Then he made a prompt decision and said, "You two have the highest cultivation. Find a chance to go in. Yunyi and I will stay here to block Xueji. We must bring Buwang back safely." Unconsciously, everyone's goal changed from the original destruction of the blood world to saving Su Buwang. That was the only blood left by Su Li. If Su Buwang died, what was the point of everything they did? Sure. Fang Yuan's eyes were full of killing intent. "No matter who you are, you will die today if you dare to kill Buwang. Everyone, attract Xueji's attention and make way for Fang Yuan and Ling Yimo." Yunyi shouted. These people, who used to be the favored ones of various sects, reacted instantly. They scattered and made a gap in a few seconds. Fang Yuan and Ling Yimo looked at each other and went in without saying anything. With a single step, he felt as though he had entered another world. The fog became thicker, and the air was so moist that it could drip blood. I've never been to the center of the blood world. Don't die before I save Buwang. Ling Mo transmitted the sound to remind him. Fong Yuan squinted his eyes and stretched out his hand to summon 2 streams of blue ice river to protect them. The water of the azure frost river can resist poison. Ling Mo snorted and did not refuse. Xue Ji could hardly be seen in the center of the bloody world. Not long after the two moved forward, they saw a blood pool. In the middle of the blood pool, standing quietly on the water surface was none other than Su Buwang. I won't. Fong Yuan was shocked and was about to go forward, but he was stopped by Ling Mo, who frowned and said, Don't go. There is something wrong with him. Ho ho ho, a hoarse laughter came out. Su Buwang raised his head, revealing an evil and distorted face. His eyes were so red as if they were soaked in blood. The red blade in his hand shone. Fong Yuan and Ling Mo's faces changed instantly, and they both flashed away. Boom! A blood-colored blade light fell from the sky and left a deep pit on the ground. A bottomless pit. Fong Yuan stared at the center of the blood pool, and his eyes were fierce. This power exceeds the nature's test. It's definitely not Buwang. Something is controlling him. Ling Mo's face was full of killing intent. When he was about to speak, Su Buwang suddenly spoke. Fong Yuan, Ling Mo, you are all sinners who killed my mother. Why do you hide? You are going to die. You all deserve to die. The calm faces of the two froze at the same time. How do you know the name? How do you know? At the moment when Fong Yuan blurted out the question, he was distracted. The blade light, which had been accumulating power in the dark, chopped down in an instant. Boom! Fong Yuan. Ling Mo's face changed slightly. Seeing that Fong Yuan was drowned by the blood-colored blade light, he was about to rescue him. Su Buwang sneered and waved the blade casually. A blood-colored stripe like a huge mountain appeared without warning and hit Ling Mo's chest head-on. Under the violent shock, Ling Mo was suddenly injured. He raised his head and spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backward. Rubbish, a bunch of rubbish. Go to hell. Ha 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 ha. Su Buwang laughed wildly, and one knife light after another chopped down crazily, without any intention of holding back. No one knew how many times he chopped down. Suddenly, a turbulent river of heaven suddenly appeared. In the blink of an eye, the blood pool was washed clean, and the blade light was crushed. Cough, cough, cough. Fong Yuan jumped out of the bottomless pit with silver light floating in his eyes. He wiped the blood from his mouth and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. Brat, you are serious. Swish. A figure flashed like a flickering light and appeared beside him in an instant. It was Ling Mo, who had just been beaten out. This is the treasure of Heaven River. Is it really powerful? I should have thought of it. Ling Mo's eyes were slightly cold. No matter how broad-minded the people of your Tianhe sect are, you can't be indifferent to the treasure being left outside, right? Fong Yuan did not respond. He just looked at Su Buwang, who was drowned by the river just now, and frowned. That feeling was like a blood clot melting in water. It was very sticky, which gave him a very bad feeling. Ho ho ho. Uncle Fong, Uncle Ling, are you going to kill me? A familiar laughter came. Fong Yuan and Ling Mo looked up at the same time. Suddenly, they saw Su Buwang with a smile on his face. He walked in the air with a blade in his hand. He was unscathed. Buwang, you... Before Fong Yuan finished his words, he was interrupted by Su Buwang. It seems that I underestimated you two uncles. Just like that, I can't send you down to apologize to my mother. So, the blood in Su Buwang's eyes faded a little, and then he touched the glowing place on his chest and pressed it hard. Fong Yuan and Ling Mo immediately saw a wisp of purple rising above Su Buwang's head and quickly integrated into the blood mist. The blood mist was immediately stimulated and condensed at a very fast speed. The mist is gone. Yun Yi, who was fighting with the 5 Shui Ji, was stunned, and then he looked happy. Did Fong Yuan and others succeed? But at this moment, the 5 Shui Ji in front of him suddenly expanded dozens of feet. Oh no! Yun Yi, hide! Su Qingtan was shocked. Yun Yi didn't have time to hide, and he was hit by the Shui Ji and flew backward. Yun Yi put his feet into the ground and finally stopped after sliding for dozens of meters. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. He gasped, "It's okay. I was careless. Eldest brother, look." Su Qingtan breathed a sigh of relief. But at this moment, Yunsan's frightened voice sounded. The sky became darker, and a breath of despair gradually shrouded them. Su Qingtan turned his head stiffly and saw dozens of Shui Ji, who were hundreds of feet tall, in front of him, had all expanded to more than 5,000 feet. He couldn't help but gasp. What the hell happened? In the center of the bloody world, the mist of the whole bloody world gathered together. In the blink of an eye, the mist was sucked up and condensed into a figure. Su Buwang looked at the mist expectantly, and his eyes were full of desire and expectation. He carefully pointed between the eyebrows of the bloody mist, and flesh and clothes appeared quickly. Then, it became the woman that Fong Yuan wanted to see even in his dreams. Su Buwang. Do you know what you are doing? The anger in Fong Yuan's eyes swelled to the extreme. He had imagined the scene of reuniting with Su Li many times, but it was not like this. Su Buwang didn't seem to hear it at all. He just looked at Su Li, who was transformed by the bloody mist, and murmured, "Mother, is so beautiful. Ha ha ha. I asked you to take revenge, but you changed me. You are really a filial child." The bloody mist person covered her mouth and smiled. Her action and demeanor were very similar to Su Li. If Fong Yuan and Yun San didn't see the process of Su Li forming, they might not be able to distinguish it for a while. You dare to blaspheme her like this? I want you to die. Fong Yuan growled, and the river all over the sky tilted down. In the blink of an eye, it turned into countless icicles and shot at them. Little guys, we could live in peace, but you have to kill me. Then don't blame me for being cruel. The bloody mist person's beautiful eyes flashed, and she gently waved her sleeve. All the icicles instantly rolled back and counterattacked Fong Yuan. Fong Yuan and Ling Mo jumped away at the same time, but there were too many icicles. After all, they didn't completely dodge. They both groaned, and their shoulders and right abdomen were penetrated. The bloody mist person took a light breath and was a little intoxicated. You really deserve to be a talent. The taste of your blood is different from that of ordinary practitioners. I haven't eaten for a long time. I am really lucky to have such delicious food as soon as I open the door. Fong Yuan pursed his lips and didn't say a word. He called back the treasure of the Milky Way. His eyes were red. He made gestures with both hands, bit the tip of his tongue, and drew a huge rune of kill. The Milky Way receives the order. Kill. Fight to the death. The broken Milky Way was immediately reorganized and turned into a huge sword of heaven hanging upside down in the nothingness. Its power swept wildly, and in the blink of an eye, it surpassed the late stage of nature's test. Fong Yuan's face also turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ling Mo's eyes were gloomy. He flashed into the dark, and in less than half a breath, he had gone to the back of the bloody mist person. The secret method of killing, blood azura. The bloody mist person narrowed her eyes and chuckled with her hand covering her mouth. With a wave of her sleeve, 8 blood dragons rushed out one after another and bit the huge sword. Chance. Ling Mo, who was hiding in the dark, had cold eyes, but he didn't show any killing intent. He silently grabbed the blood light on Su Buwang's chest. He had already seen the key. At this time, Su Buwang, who had been staring at the bloody mist person, suddenly turned his head and showed a bright smile to Ling Mo, who was still invisible. Oh no! Ling Mo's heart skipped a beat. It was too late for him to dodge. Su Buwang slashed backhand, and the long knife light slashed across Ling Mo's body obliquely. A large amount of blood splashed on the face of the bloody mist person, Su Li. Ling Mo stared at Su Buwang, staggered back a few steps, and then knelt on the ground. The red blood flowed down along the hideous wound on the chest, and soon dyed the surrounding ground red. The bloody mist person, Su Li, turned her head, licked the blood on her mouth, and smiled like a flower. So sweet. Chapter 551. Seeing that Ling Mo was in danger, Fang Yuan's pupils shrank. He changed the gesture in his hands. The Milky Way, which had been condensed into a giant sword, immediately separated a part of the river and rolled Ling Mo back quickly. The perfect giant sword immediately showed some flaws. The bloody mist, Su Li's eyes flashed. She chuckled and said, "The most precious Milky Way, if it is held by your elders, I may have some trouble. But your cultivation is so weak." She waved her sleeves gently, and 8 blood dragons instantly bit the flaws. The original stalemate was immediately reversed. Cracks appeared on the surface of the giant sword. Countless fragments were gnawed down and turned into water again and fell to the ground. Oh no! Fang Yuan's face changed slightly. His hands seemed to be stuck in a swamp, and he couldn't continue the gesture. He gritted his teeth and trembled for a moment. But he saw the bloody mist. Su Li waved her sleeves, and 8 blood dragons rushed out instantly and tore the giant sword. "Break, for me!" Boom! The giant sword in the sky exploded instantly, and the most precious Milky Way poured back. Fang Yuan's face was as pale as paper in an instant. Blood flowed from the corners of his mouth, and his hands made the sound of joints cracking. His 10 fingers were all broken. He was defeated. Fang Yuan's hands hung down, and he looked up and stared at the bloody mist figure. The unwillingness and killing intent in his eyes seemed to be able to burn the sky. Being stared at like this, the bloody mist, Su Li's face suddenly darkened. She snorted, and the 8 blood dragons immediately turned into 8 blood-colored lightning. In the blink of an eye, 8 blood holes were drilled in Fang Yuan's chest. Wow! Fang Yuan groaned, and his body couldn't support him. He half knelt down, and a mouthful of blood mixed with visceral fragments was sprayed in front of him. The weak should have the consciousness of the weak. The bloody mist, Su Li, turned her head and touched Su Buwang's cheek. She said softly, "Young man, you are no match for me. If you kneel down and beg for mercy, maybe I will be in a good mood and keep you as my blood slaves, so that your blood will be sucked dry and your body and soul will be destroyed." Ling Mo was covered with blood. He walked slowly to Fang Yuan with his sword. He stared at the bloody mist, Su Li, and his eyes were full of indifference and sarcasm. "You don't deserve it." The bloody mist, Su Li, smiled slightly. Suddenly, another blood-colored light turned into a long whip and whipped Ling Mo. The huge force hit Ling Mo far away. He fell into the dust and directly fainted. Fang Yuan almost bit his lips to bleed. He took a deep breath, and his eyes fell on Su Buwang. Mo, Su Li, Su Li, Su, bang. As soon as Fang Yuan finished speaking, the same bloody whip shadow came and tore the clothes on the back of Fang Yuan, leaving a hideous crack. Su Fang was Ling Su Mo. Came. Was Kai Mo Su in Su and said. Time Su Mo Li was Mo Su. Seeing this scene, the bloody mist Su Li snorted and saw Ling Mo, who was in a coma not far away. She said, well, it's boring. Instead of accepting 2 blood slaves, it's better to have a good meal. Go to hell. Fang Yuan was lying on the ground. There was a lot of dust in his eyes, but he still opened his eyes and tried to get up. Everything in front of him became hazy. As the voice of the bloody mist, Su Li fell, a cold force entered his body, and his blood was quickly drawn out. The power was disappearing. It was so cold. Is this the end? It shouldn't be like this. I haven't saved Buwang. I haven't found her. How can I die? Suddenly, a pair of feet fell in front of him. The black gauze was fluttering beside him. He tried to see who it was, but it was always chaotic. You disgust me. Su Li's voice was unreasonably calm, but the bloody mist Su Li feeling inexplicably cold. Who are you? What I do has nothing to do with you. Why do you meddle in other people's business? Su Li heard the words and immediately smiled. She smiled very brightly, but the sense of crisis in the heart of the bloody mist Su Li feeling soared. Nothing to do with me. Look again. Is it nothing to do with me? She stepped out, and her face instantly returned to the original appearance of her previous life. But the difference from the previous life was that there was a lotus mark at the corner of her eyes. The face of the bloody mist Su Li feeling changed dramatically. Before the words were spoken, Su Li suddenly disappeared, and then appeared in front of the bloody mist figure. She grabbed both sides of the body of the bloody mist figure and tore it fiercely. Tear. Aw, 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 aw. The blood mist figure that had taken human form was instantly torn to shreds like a paper doll. Su Buwang looked at Su Li's face with a confused face and murmured, Mother. Su Li smiled sweetly and pointed at the place between his eyebrows like lightning. The sleeping incantation immediately took effect. Su Buwang's body softened and fell down. Ah. My transformation. You ruin my cultivation. Ruin my cultivation. I don't care who you are. Go to hell. The unpleasant scream of the bloody mist resounded through the sky. The chaotic bloody gale suddenly blew up, and a total of 16 blood dragons roared out of the gale. Su Li gently put down Su Buwang, and then threw 2 nimbus to Su Buwang and Ling Mo to protect their lives. After doing this, the blood dragons were less than half a zhang behind them. Ha 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 ha. What daughter of luck! No matter you are a human or a ghost, I will take away your luck today. Daughter of luck. Fang Yuan, who was in a daze, suddenly woke up when he heard this word. He struggled to turn his head to look at the bloody mist. Unfortunately, there were so many double images in front of him that he couldn't see anything clearly. Really? Su Li slightly raised her lips, and her pupils instantly turned into a dark pool. The body of evil ghost. Boom! A strong power suddenly burst out from Su Li's thin body. Before the 16 blood dragons touched Su Li's back, they were all shaken away and returned to their places. The scattered blood mist could not be condensed. Emperor's power. The face in the bloody mist changed wildly, and the killing intent in his eyes was instantly occupied by fear. How is it possible? There can't be an emperor in this world. They are all fake. As soon as the voice fell, the bloody mist figure noticed that it was dark in front of him. Su Li, who was looking after Su Buwang in the distance, came to him and raised her hand to slap him hard. Crack! The bloody mist tumbled, and a humanoid bloody mist figure could be faintly seen being thrown far away. How dare you hurt my people? Who do you think you are? The bloody mist figure was stunned by this slap, and his body was scattered a lot. When he was about to get up, he looked up and saw another slap rapidly enlarging in front of him. How dare you transform into my body as an evil ghost? Hurt my intimacy. The bloody mist figure rolled far away and stood up again. Suddenly, he was horrified to find that only half of his body was left. How is it possible? You are a human clan. How can you hurt me? Sulit narrowed her eyes. Who told me that you are a human clan? The bloody mist figure suddenly thought of something and panicked. You are not an emperor of the human clan. Senior, please forgive me. I have eyes but failed to see, and offended a mighty figure. For the sake of alien clans, please spare my life. Su Li's eyes were playful, and she didn't mean to answer the bloody mist figure at all. She just gently put a drop of blood on her fingertip and shot it into the bloody mist figure's body. I heard that you like to suck blood very much. The crimson blood blended into the bloody mist, and was quickly absorbed by the bloody mist instinctively. The bloody mist figure was stunned at first, and then a sharp pain suddenly came from the bottom of her heart. What did you do to me? Su Li's eyes were indifferent, and she didn't respond. She just turned around, stretched out her hand in the direction of Yunyi and others, and shook it. Bang! 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 Dozens of blood monsters with a height of 5,000 feet exploded at the same time, like bloody fireworks, bright and dreamy. Yunyi and others, who were already desperate, stared at this scene in a daze, as if they were in a dream. My Dharma body, the bloody mist figure watched in horror as pieces of black charcoal fell from her body. She just absorbed a drop of Su Li's blood. How could this happen? Even the most violent blood poison she had ever seen could not destroy her body. But now, it had been so easily destroyed. Your Holiness. I am useful. I am from an ancient lost clan, and I know many secrets. Later, I was accepted as a spiritual body by the opposing blood bead. I know the inheritance of the opposing blood emperor. Save me. Before the bloody mist figure finished its words, it screamed, and its charcoal speed suddenly accelerated. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a pool of black charcoal marks. Save you. If you hurt them, you will only have one ending. Unfortunately, you didn't hear it. After Su Li said a few words to the bloody mist figure that had turned into charcoal, she retracted her gaze and walked to Su Buwang. A bead suddenly flew out of his chest, and the wound healed in the blink of an eye. Su Li pinched the warm bead with 2 fingers, and a thought flashed through her eyes. It is really the bead I got from Lin Yanxing. In the reincarnation mirror, I finally abandoned everything, and this bead was also inherited by Buwang. It has been in my body all the time. The opposing blood bead seems to be the inheritance of the opposing blood emperor. Although my current strength is still some distance away from that of the opposing blood emperor, it is not far. This thing is useless, but it is a lucky chance for Buwang. But before that, I need to check the opposing blood bead to prevent it from hurting Buwang. Su Li put away the bead, and Buwang checked it again. After confirming that there was no serious problem, she put it into an exquisite wing room in Songlei's cave. After doing this, Su Li turned around, and her face had returned to the appearance of this life. Then she waved her hand, and the 2 people lying on the ground, half dead, suddenly floated up and followed her. The bloody mist figure is a little more powerful than the Grand Elder I killed in Han's sect. No wonder Ling Mo and others are restrained everywhere. But now, the bloody realm can be dispersed. Su Li narrowed her eyes, and the fragments of the small world emerged behind her. With my current strength, I don't need the fragments of the small world. Let them do their last work. As Su Li's voice fell, countless fragments of the small world with colorful luster rose into the air and hit the bloody sky. Rumble, what's that sound? As soon as Yun-Yi heard the roar, someone suddenly pointed to the sky and exclaimed, "Look! The sky is cracked." Yun-Yi and others looked up and saw a crack in the dark red sky, and the crack was still expanding at a very fast speed. The bloody realm is broken. Yun-Yi was overjoyed, Fong Yuan and others succeeded. At the same time, other small bloody realms in Ju City also showed signs of breaking. Everyone was surprised. They won the final battle after all. Fong Yuan's body floated in the air. Although his body was no longer uncomfortable, he was still weak and powerless. But he still struggled and forcibly turned his head, trying to see the face of the woman beside him. Su Li. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.